As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, before whom I stand. With these powerful words, Elijah burst onto the biblical scene and into a corrupt kingdom that had forgotten God. Welcome to tonight's sleep story, where we'll journey through every chapter of Elijah's remarkable life, from confronting the wicked King Ahab to his miraculous ascension in a chariot of fire. I'll be speaking slowly and calmly, making this the perfect way to reflect on timeless spiritual truths while gently drifting off to sleep. So adjust your pillow, take a deep breath, and prepare to be transported to ancient Israel. But before you get comfortable, if this type of content helps you unwind, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. Also, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is. We're building a global community here. Your support is very much appreciated. So without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Introduction. In the warm glow of ancient times, long before our modern world took shape, lived a man whose name still echoes through the corridors of faith, Elijah, a prophet whose life unfolds like a tapestry woven with threads of courage, doubt, wonder, and divine purpose. His story begins in troubled times when the kingdom of Israel had strayed from its roots. Tonight, as you rest and listen, we'll walk together through valleys and mountains, through drought and rain, through fire and whispers. The journey of Elijah offers us more than history. It gives us a glimpse into the human heart when it stands face to face with the divine. Why Elijah? Perhaps because in his story we find our own, his moments of strength when he stood alone against hundreds, his times of weakness when he ran in fear, his silent waiting for guidance, his bold proclamations of truth. In these, we see reflections of our own struggles and triumphs. The world before Elijah was one in flux. The United Kingdom, built by David and Solomon, had split apart at the seams. Brothers fought brothers. The northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah now stood as separate nations, often at odds with each other. This divide ran deeper than politics. It cut through the very soul of a people trying to remember who they were. In the north, where our story unfolds, kings came and went in quick succession. Some through natural death, others through plots and schemes that would make your heart race, but not tonight. Tonight, we speak softly of these things, letting the weight of history rock you gently towards sleep. The land itself seemed to mirror this turmoil. Rolling hills gave way to deep valleys. Fertile plains stood in contrast to harsh deserts. The Jordan River flowed as it always had, perhaps wondering why the people who drank from it could not find the same peace in their flowing together. Into this world stepped Elijah. No royal birth announced his coming. No palace raised him in luxury. He emerged from a small town called Tishbe in the region of Gilead, east of the Jordan. A simple man, it seems, but one whose words would shake the foundations of kingdoms. As your eyes grow heavy, picture this unlikely prophet, his cloak rough against sun-browned skin, his eyes clear with purpose, his heart tuned to a voice that others had forgotten how to hear. This is where we begin our journey with Elijah the Tishbite, whose name means, "My God is Yahweh," a living declaration in a time when such clarity was fading from view. Rest now as we prepare to walk alongside this remarkable figure. Let his story settle around you like a warm blanket on a cool evening. Tomorrow we'll continue our path, but for now, simply breathe and know that even in the most troubled times, light finds a way to shine through the darkness. Historical and cultural context. Israel and Judah in the time of the prophets. The soft glow of oil lamps once lit the hillsides of two sister kingdoms, Israel to the north, Judah to the south. Once united under the golden age of Solomon, they now stood apart, two paths diverging through history. The year was roughly 870 BCE when Elijah's story truly begins, though time flowed differently then, marked by harvests and kings rather than clocks and calendars. In the north, Israel had seen its capital move to Samaria, a hill city ringed with walls of stone. King Omri had built it, and now his son Ahab sat upon the throne. The northern kingdom brimmed with natural wealth, fertile valleys, trade routes that brought goods from distant lands, and villages where farmers tended crops that their great-grandparents had planted. To the south lay Judah, smaller but steady, still ruled by the line of David. Jerusalem stood as its crown jewel, with the Temple of Solomon catching the first light of dawn each morning. While kings came and went through blood and betrayal in the north, Judah kept its royal line intact, a flame passed carefully from hand to hand. Between these kingdoms flowed not just the Jordan River, but streams of culture and belief that mingled and sometimes clashed. The people spoke Hebrew, their words carrying the rhythm of desert winds and coastal waves. They built homes of stone and mud brick, cool retreats from the Mediterranean sun. Markets buzzed with trade, olives and grain, pottery and cloth, silver and spices. Daily life followed ancient patterns. Women drew water from wells as the day cooled, their voices rising in conversation. Men worked fields handed down through generations, their hands knowing exactly how deeply to plant each seed. Children learned family trades and stories, songs and prayers, all part of being a people set apart. Yet the world around them was changing. Mighty empires rose beyond their borders. Assyria to the east was growing stronger each year, its shadow lengthening across the lands between rivers. Egypt to the south remained a sleeping giant, still dreaming of past glories. Closer still, the Phoenicians along the coast brought new goods, new wealth, and new gods. These outside powers didn't just bring trade, they brought ideas that tested old faiths. In this age of prophets, Israel stood at a crossroads of belief. The ancient worship of Yahweh, with its focus on justice, mercy, and covenant, now competed with gods who promised rain for crops, victory in battle, or pleasure without restraint. Most families still kept the Sabbath, still told the stories of Abraham and Moses around evening fires. Yet many also hedged their bets, keeping small idols tucked away, just in case. This mixing troubled the prophets deeply, not just Elijah, but others whose names echo through time: Elisha, Amos, Hosea. Harvest festivals marked the turning seasons. Passover in spring, when lambs were slain in memory of freedom won. Weeks when early grain was gathered. Booths when families camped in simple shelters to recall their wilderness journey. These rhythms kept time for all, binding past to present. Kings held power but shared it with priests, with wealthy landowners, with tribal elders whose memories reached back decades. Villages governed their own affairs when they could, turning to higher powers only when local wisdom fell short. It was a world where dreams still carried divine messages, where a stranger at your door might be an angel in disguise, where the thin space between heaven and earth seemed crossable by those with eyes to see the path. This was the world that shaped Elijah. Not some distant fairy tale, but a place of dust and dew, of hunger and hope, of people trying to find their way through changing times while holding on to who they truly were. Spiritual landscape. The worship of Baal and Asherah. The hills of ancient Israel once held more than olive groves and shepherd paths. On high places stood altars, some to Yahweh, the God who had led them from Egypt through parted waters, but increasingly to other powers that promised more visible blessings. Chief among these was Baal, whose name simply meant Lord or Master. Baal worship came in waves from the coastal cities, where Phoenician traders brought not just purple cloth and cedar wood, but their storm god, who they claimed, rode the thunderclouds and split the sky with lightning. To a farming people always watching the heavens for rain, this god held obvious appeal. If Baal controlled the storms, perhaps his favor would ensure full cisterns and growing crops. In villages across the northern kingdom, small clay figures of Baal began to appear in homes. His image showed him young and strong, arm raised with a lightning bolt ready to throw. His priests taught that he died each summer when the land turned brown and dry, then was reborn when winter rains returned. This cycle of death and rebirth seemed to match the seasons farmers knew so well. Beside Baal stood Asherah, worshipped as his consort or sometimes as a goddess in her own right. Her symbols were trees or wooden poles placed near altars. Some called her the mother goddess, queen of heaven, giver of life. Where Baal brought the rain from above, Asherah represented the earth's fertility below. Together, they formed a complete circle of life in the minds of many. Worship at these shrines differed greatly from the austere service at Yahweh's temple. Baal rituals involved feasting, dancing, and often acts meant to mirror the sacred marriage of the god and goddess. Music from drums and flutes filled these gatherings. Wine flowed freely, and the boundaries between worship and celebration blurred under starry skies. The appeal wasn't just spiritual, but practical. Baal priests claimed direct influence over weather and crops. In times of drought, they performed elaborate ceremonies, sometimes cutting themselves so their blood would move Baal to action. These dramatic displays drew crowds and converts. For many Israelites, this shift happened gradually, almost without notice. They didn't necessarily abandon their ancestral faith, they simply added new gods to cover all possibilities. A farmer might offer first fruits at Yahweh's altar while keeping a Baal figure in a niche at home. A merchant might pray to Yahweh for honest dealings, but wear an Asherah charm for good fortune. This mixing troubled those who remembered the first commandment, "You shall have no other gods before me." The prophets saw not harmless cultural borrowing, but a fundamental betrayal of identity. Israel had been formed through covenant with one God, not many. Their very purpose, to be a light to nations, was being dimmed by these foreign shadows. What made this spiritual drift even harder to resist was royal support. When King Ahab married the Phoenician princess Jezebel, Baal worship gained official backing. No longer just folk practice, it became state religion. Temples rose in prominent places, royal funds supported hundreds of priests and prophets dedicated to these gods. Yet, even as Baal worship spread across public spaces, quiet homes still passed down older ways. Grandmothers still taught children the Shema prayer. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Fathers still marked doorposts with words of ancient covenant. Not everyone bowed to new gods, even when doing so might bring social or political advantage. This divided heart of Israel, torn between the God who had chosen them and gods they could choose, created the tension into which Elijah would step. His challenge would be not just to confront a king, but to call an entire people back from a path that promised quick rewards, but led away from their deepest truth. The rise of Ahab and Jezebel: power, politics, and idolatry. The royal city of Samaria nestled on its hill like a crown upon the land. White stone walls caught the morning light, while inside the palace of King Ahab bustled with activity. Servants hurried through cool corridors. Foreign delegates waited in antechambers. Guards in polished armor stood at gates and doorways, symbols of the king's growing power. Ahab himself was not what stories often paint him to be. The son of Omri, a military commander who seized the throne, Ahab inherited a kingdom gaining strength. Under his rule, cities expanded, new buildings rose from foundations of stone, trade flourished with neighboring lands. By many measures of kingship, he succeeded where others had failed. His marriage to Jezebel sealed an alliance with the wealthy coastal kingdom of Sidon. This union brought gold into royal coffers and opened trade routes that made Israel prosperous. Farmers found markets for their grain, artisans crafted goods for foreign buyers. A golden age seemed possible after years of struggle. Yet this political match carried spiritual consequences few had foreseen. Jezebel arrived in Samaria not just as a bride, but as a devoted follower of Baal and Asherah. Her faith wasn't casual, it formed the core of her identity. The daughter of a priest king, she believed with fierce certainty in her God's power and right to worship. Within the palace walls, changes began subtly at first. A small shrine appeared, then grew. Phoenician priests arrived, their foreign accents soon familiar in royal halls. Jezebel's influence grew with each passing season, not through magic, but through the ordinary power of a strong mind paired with royal authority. Ahab himself seems to have viewed religion more as political tool than personal conviction. When Jezebel asked for temples to be built for Baal, he likely saw practical advantages: pleasing his wife, strengthening foreign ties, appeasing those among his people already drawn to these gods. The old faith could still have its place, but room would be made for new beliefs. This pragmatic approach missed something crucial. The worship of Yahweh wasn't meant to be one option among many, but the foundation of Israel's entire existence as a people. The covenant made at Sinai had established not just religious practices, but laws for justice, care for the poor, and right relations between neighbors. When the center shifted, everything else moved with it. Soon, Jezebel's zeal outpaced her husband's political calculations. Not content with establishing her faith alongside existing beliefs, she began actively suppressing the prophets of Yahweh. Some were driven from their homes. Others went into hiding, fed in secret by those still loyal to the old ways. A few paid the ultimate price for their refusal to bend. The royal court changed too. Advisors who might have counseled caution found themselves replaced by those who echoed what the king and queen wished to hear. Ahab, for all his skill in matters of state, became increasingly isolated from the heart of his people. From his hilltop palace, the growing discontent in villages and farms remained largely hidden from view. Meanwhile, Queen Jezebel became a force in her own right. Unlike many royal wives content to manage household affairs, she stepped boldly into public life. Her name, which might mean, "Where is the prince?" in a question about Baal, became instead a statement of authority. Here was the prince, in this woman who refused to stay in shadows. Together, Ahab and Jezebel created a kingdom increasingly divided against itself. On the surface, prosperity masked deeper problems. New buildings gleamed while ancient covenant lay forgotten. Foreign gold flowed in, while justice trickled away. Religious festivals grew more lavish, while their meaning faded. For most ordinary people, life continued in its rhythms. They worked their fields, raised their children, and tried to navigate the shifting spiritual landscape without drawing unwanted attention. Many found it easier to bow briefly before new altars than to risk standing out. Survival often meant compromise, yet some remembered. Some kept faith with the God who had brought them through sea and desert. Some whispered prayers that had been spoken for generations. And somewhere in the hill country of Gilead, a man named Elijah watched, listened, and waited for the moment when silence would no longer serve. Enter Elijah, the unassuming Tishbite. The morning mist still clung to the hills of Gilead when he first appears in our story, not with trumpet blast or royal announcement, but simply as a man from Tishbe, Elijah. His name itself a testimony. My God is Yahweh. Spoken each time someone called to him across a field or marketplace. What did he look like, this prophet who would challenge kings? Scripture gives us hints rather than portraits. Later, another king would recognize him by his garment of hair and leather belt. Simple clothes for a simple life. His hands likely rough from work, his skin weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, we might imagine, carried both gentleness and fire, the paradox of one who has gazed long upon holy things. Tishbe itself was no great city, a small settlement east of the Jordan River, where hills rolled toward distant deserts. Here, removed from royal capitals and trading ports, old ways held stronger. Children still learned the stories of Abraham's call, Jacob's ladder, Moses, and the burning bush. Sabbaths still meant rest rather than reduced trade. The rhythm of life still followed patterns set down by ancestors long departed. In such places, one learns to read more than scrolls. Elijah knew the language of changing skies, of plants that signal drought or plenty, of animals that sense danger before humans can name it. This wisdom of earth and seasons would serve him well in days to come, when wilderness became both exile and sanctuary. We don't know of his family or how he earned his bread before prophecy claimed him. Was he a shepherd watching flocks on hillsides, a farmer coaxing crops from stony ground, a craftsman shaping wood or stone? Scripture keeps these details veiled, perhaps to remind us that God's call comes not based on lineage or trade, but on the hidden readiness of a heart. What set Elijah apart wasn't outward greatness, but inner attentiveness. In an age when many heard only what they wished to hear, he listened for a voice beyond human clamor. While others rushed toward comfort and security, he remained open to uncomfortable truths. His strength lay not in physical might, but in this quiet willingness to stand firm when foundations shook. Historians tell us prophets weren't unusual in ancient Israel. Some attached themselves to royal courts offering counsel that kings wanted to hear. Others formed communities, studying, praying, and passing down wisdom from teacher to student. A few wandered alone, outside established structures, free to speak without favor or fear. Elijah seems to have begun among this last group, unattached, unannounced, appearing suddenly before kings and commoners alike with messages that cut through pretense. No school of prophets claimed him as student. No political faction counted him as ally. He moved like the wind, present where needed, gone when work was done. His arrival in our story comes at precisely the moment when hope seemed dim. The worship of Baal had royal support. The prophets of Yahweh were scattered or silenced. Ordinary people found themselves caught between ancient covenant and new pressures. The very identity of Israel hung in balance, yet one man, stepping from the shadows of an overlooked town, would tip these scales, not through armies or wealth or political scheme, but through unshakable certainty in the God whose name he carried. Elijah stood as living reminder that a single voice, speaking truth, can echo louder than choruses singing comfortable lies. As night draws near and your breath grows steady, picture this unlikely hero at the edge of his journey. Not yet the great prophet who would call down fire, not the broken man who would run in fear, not yet the listener who would hear God in silence. Just Elijah the Tishbite, moving toward a destiny he could not yet see clearly. Tomorrow will follow his first steps into prophecy. A drought declared, a king confronted, a nation facing consequences long delayed. But for now, rest in knowing that even the greatest journeys begin with simple origins, and even the most powerful voices first speak in whispers. The drought, Elijah's first prophecy. In the quiet hills of Gilead, a humble man from Tishbe prepared for the greatest challenge of his life. Elijah, whose name means "My God is Yahweh," stood at the threshold of his calling. The land had grown distant from its sacred roots, turning toward false idols and forgotten promises. King Ahab ruled from his palace in Samaria, his heart pulled away from truth by his Phoenician wife Jezebel. Together they had built temples to Baal throughout the northern kingdom, leading the people into worship of storm gods who promised rain and harvest, but delivered nothing but empty rituals. Elijah walked many days to reach the king's palace. Dust gathered on his simple clothes as he moved through villages where altars to foreign gods stood in place of those dedicated to the Lord. The prophet's heart grew heavy with each step, yet his resolve never wavered. The royal guards eyed this stranger with suspicion as he approached the throne room. Without ceremony or introduction, Elijah stepped forward and spoke words that would echo through centuries. "As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word." No lengthy speech, no grand proclamation, just a simple declaration that would bring a mighty kingdom to its knees. The courtiers laughed. The king dismissed him with a wave, but in the heavens, clouds began to scatter and disappear. That night, as Elijah rested beneath the stars, divine guidance reached him. "Leave this place, turn eastward and hide by the brook Cherith, which flows into the Jordan." The prophet understood immediately. Ahab would soon realize the drought was real, and his wrath would be terrible. At dawn, Elijah gathered his few possessions and slipped away from Samaria. The journey to Cherith took him through valleys already showing signs of the coming hardship. Leaves curled at their edges, and the usually lush grass had lost its vibrant green. The brook Cherith offered shelter between steep banks, where Elijah could remain hidden from searching eyes. Clear water still flowed over smooth stones, though the prophet knew this too would soon diminish. He made a simple shelter of branches and settled into what would become his wilderness sanctuary. Day by day, the drought tightened its grip on the land. Fields turned brown, then gray. Wells that had served villages for generations began to dry. In palaces and huts alike, people looked skyward, searching for any sign of clouds. Meanwhile, Elijah watched as God fulfilled another promise. Ravens came morning and evening, carrying bread and meat in their beaks. These wild birds, considered unclean by Jewish law, became the servants of divine provision. The prophet drank from the brook and ate what the birds brought, sustained by faith in the wilderness. As weeks turned to months, the landscape transformed. Trees shed their leaves out of season. Farmers slaughtered livestock they could no longer feed. The brook that had been Elijah's lifeline grew smaller day by day until it was merely a trickle between stones. King Ahab sent riders throughout the land and beyond, searching for the prophet who had pronounced this curse. But Elijah remained safely hidden, watching and waiting as the drought accomplished its divine purpose, revealing the powerlessness of Baal, the supposed god of storms and fertility. When the brook finally dried completely, Elijah looked up at the empty sky. His time at Cherith had ended. Again of the Lord came, "Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. I have commanded a widow there to provide for you." With a heart full of trust, Elijah gathered his belongings and set out northward toward a foreign land where Baal worship had originated and where an unexpected miracle awaited. Ravens by the brook, a time of solitude. The journey to Cherith had been Elijah's first step into a deeper wilderness, not just of land, but of soul. As he settled beside the flowing water, the prophet entered a season of profound solitude. Here, away from the chaos of Ahab's court and the corruption of Israel's cities, Elijah found space to listen. Morning mist rose from the brook as each day began. Elijah would kneel at the water's edge, cupping the cool liquid in his hands for drinking and washing. These simple rituals marked the rhythm of his days. No temple ceremonies, no crowded marketplaces, just the quiet companionship of nature and its creator. The ravens came with startling regularity. Their black wings would appear against the dawn sky, bearing morsels of bread and meat. Some scholars believe these provisions may have come from nearby villages or even from the king's own kitchens, the irony of Ahab unknowingly feeding the very prophet he sought to kill. Elijah's shelter grew more refined with time. What began as a simple lean-to evolved into a small hut of branches and leaves. He arranged stones to create a place for fire, though he used it sparingly to avoid detection. At night, he would look up through gaps in his roof at stars scattered across the vastness of heaven. The silence of Cherith was not empty but full of bird song, rustling leaves, and the steady murmur of flowing water. In this natural cathedral, Elijah's prayers deepened. No longer distracted by the noise of human activity, he began to recognize the subtle ways God speaks in quietness. Sometimes he would walk along the brook's edge, collecting edible plants to supplement what the ravens brought. These slow, deliberate movements became a form of moving meditation. Every berry, every leaf, represented divine care in a time of national judgment. As the drought intensified, Elijah witnessed its effects on the wilderness. Animals came more frequently to drink at the brook. He observed deer, foxes, and countless birds relying on this diminishing lifeline. The prophet shared a sanctuary with these fellow creatures, all dependent on the same source. The changing seasons brought their own challenges. Summer heat baked the ground hard as clay. Winter brought cold nights when Elijah would wrap himself in his cloak, huddled near embers of his small fire. Through all weather, the ravens continued their faithful service. During this time of separation, Elijah's spirit grew stronger, even as the brook grew weaker. He reflected on Israel's history, the deliverance from Egypt, the giving of the law, the conquest of Canaan. Each story reinforced his understanding of God's faithfulness through generations. What thoughts filled Elijah's mind as he watched the brook slowly disappear? Perhaps he wondered about the suffering throughout the land. Perhaps he questioned how long the drought would last. Yet in the core of his being, the prophet knew this harsh medicine was necessary to turn hearts back to truth. The wildlife began to thin as water became scarce. Birds no longer sang with the same enthusiasm. Plants withered along the banks. Elijah observed these changes with a heart both heavy and hopeful. Heavy for the present suffering, hopeful for the renewal it would eventually bring. When the last puddles of Cherith dried in the sun, Elijah faced a moment of testing. Would new directions come? Had his mission ended before it truly began? Standing beside the dusty stream bed, he waited with the patience born of months in solitude. The divine voice, now familiar through long communion, spoke again with a new assignment. It was time to leave this sanctuary that had nurtured and protected him. The lessons of Cherith, dependence, patience, attentiveness, had prepared him for what lay ahead. With a final glance at the place that had been his home, Elijah shouldered his few possessions and turned his face toward Zarephath. The solitude of the brook had shaped him like water-shaped stone, gradually, persistently, and with perfect purpose. The widow of Zarephath. Miracles in Sidon. The road to Zarephath took Elijah across borders and boundaries, not just of land, but of faith. Sidon lay in Phoenician territory, the very heartland of Baal worship. How strange that God would send his prophet to the homeland of Queen Jezebel, whose hatred for Yahweh burned like fire. Dust clung to Elijah's sandals and robes as he traveled north. The drought had spread beyond Israel's borders, affecting even the coastal regions of Phoenicia. Fields that should have been green with spring growth instead showed only withered stems and cracked soil. Zarephath came into view as a cluster of simple buildings near the sea. This was no grand city, but a working town where fishermen and craftspeople made their living. As Elijah approached the town gate, he noticed a woman gathering sticks, thin, dry branches that had fallen from dying trees. Something in her movements, a certain careful deliberation perhaps, or the dignity maintained despite obvious poverty, caught his attention. Divine certainty filled his heart. This was the widow God had promised would provide for him. "Please bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink," Elijah called to her. The request was bold in a time of drought, yet she turned toward her home to fulfill it. As she went, he added, "Please bring me a morsel of bread in your hand." The widow stopped and turned. Her face showed the strain of prolonged hardship. "As the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I do not have bread, only a handful of flour in a bin and a little oil in a jar. I am gathering sticks that I may prepare a last meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Her words carried no self-pity, only the quiet acceptance of what seemed inevitable. The drought had taken everything, leaving only enough for a final meal before starvation claimed them both. Elijah's response must have seemed impossible. "Do not fear. Go and do as you have said, but make me a small cake from it first, and afterward make some for yourself and your son. For thus says the Lord God of Israel, the bin of flour shall not be used up, nor shall the jar of oil run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain on the earth." What thoughts crossed the widow's mind as she heard these words? Perhaps she recognized something in this stranger's eyes. A certainty, a compassion that transcended ordinary human kindness. Or perhaps desperate hope made her willing to take an extraordinary risk. She returned to her home, this foreign woman of faith, and did exactly as Elijah had instructed. With trembling hands, she mixed the last of her flour with oil and baked a small cake for the prophet before preparing food for herself and her son. Then came the miracle. Quiet, domestic, yet profound. The next morning, she reached into the flour bin expecting emptiness, but found instead a handful waiting. The oil jar, which should have been dry, contained enough to prepare another day's bread. Day after day, this pattern continued, never abundant, never overflowing, just enough for each day's needs. The flour did not increase, it simply did not diminish. The oil did not multiply, it simply did not run dry. In this daily renewal, the widow and her son witnessed divine faithfulness in its most intimate form. Elijah stayed with this family, occupying an upper room in their modest home. He became part of their household rhythm, the morning preparation of bread, the careful management of limited resources, the evening conversations as lamplight cast warm shadows on humble walls. The prophet who had lived in wilderness solitude now experienced a different kind of blessing: community. He shared meals with the widow and her son, listened to their stories, and gradually became not just a guest, but family. In this Phoenician home, far from the temple in Jerusalem, genuine worship took place. As weeks turned to months, Zarephath itself began to know Elijah. Though he kept his identity quiet, his presence brought a sense of peace that extended beyond the widow's home. In a land dedicated to Baal, the God of Israel was silently at work, sustaining life and nurturing faith. The flour and oil continued their daily renewal, a persistent reminder that even in the most desperate circumstances, provision comes to those who trust. Not extravagant wealth, but daily bread. Not excess, but enough. This modest miracle sustained 3 lives while a greater confrontation brewed on the horizon. The resurrection of the widow's son, life and death interwoven. In the quiet rhythm of days at Zarephath, tragedy struck without warning. The widow's son, who had survived the early months of drought through the miracle of the flour and oil, fell suddenly ill. His fever burned hot as desert sand, his breathing grew labored, and his young body weakened hour by hour. The widow tended her son with desperate care, cool cloths on his forehead like herbal remedies passed down through generations, whispered prayers to whatever divine power might listen. Elijah too prayed from his upper room, sensing the battle between life and death unfolding beneath his feet. Despite their efforts, the boy's condition worsened. One morning, the prophet woke to the sound of weeping. He descended to find the widow cradling her son's still body, rocking gently as mothers have done in grief since time began. The miracle of sustained life through endless flour and oil now seemed a cruel prelude to deeper loss. Through tears, the widow looked up at Elijah with questions etched in her expression. "What have you against me, O man of God? Have you come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to kill my son?" Her words revealed ancient beliefs that suffering came as punishment for wrongdoing. In her grief, she wondered if the prophet's presence had drawn divine attention to sins she thought forgotten. Had the daily miracle been merely a setup for greater sorrow? Elijah's response was not philosophical debate, but immediate action. "Give me your son," he said, reaching for the lifeless child. The weight of the boy in his arms, the heaviness of death itself, must have been overwhelming as he carried him up the stairs to his own chamber. In the privacy of his room, Elijah laid the boy on his bed. Then came a prayer unlike any recorded before in Scripture. Not a distant petition, but an urgent cry born of genuine anguish. "O Lord my God, have you also brought tragedy on the widow with whom I lodge by killing her son?" 3 times Elijah stretched himself upon the child's body, an act of identification and connection, his warm flesh pressed against cold skin, his breathing strong against lungs that no longer drew air. "O Lord my God," he cried out, "please let this child's soul come back to him." The moments that followed held the silence of ultimate suspense. Then, a flutter of eyelids, a small catch of breath, color returning to pale cheeks. The impossible threshold between death and life had been crossed again, this time in reverse. Elijah gathered the breathing child in his arms and carried him down the stairs. No words could capture the emotion of that moment when he placed the living boy in his mother's embrace. "See," he said simply, "your son lives." The widow's response revealed a journey beyond mere gratitude. "Now by this I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is the truth." Not just acknowledgement of a miracle, but recognition of ultimate reality. Not just acceptance of divine power, but surrender to divine truth. This resurrection in Zarephath marked the first recorded instance in Scripture of someone being raised from death. The significance extended beyond one family's joy. It stood as testimony that the God of Israel held power over life's greatest enemy. While Baal's temple stood empty and powerless during the drought, Yahweh demonstrated authority over both the sustenance of life and its restoration. In the days that followed, the relationship between prophet and widow deepened through shared wonder. The boy who had crossed death's threshold brought new energy to their small household. His laughter echoed against walls that had known only worried whispers. His appetite gave new meaning to the daily miracle of flour and oil. For Elijah, this resurrection confirmed his calling in profound ways. The God who had sent ravens, preserved a brook, guided him to Zarephath, and maintained flour and oil had now reversed death itself. Each miracle built upon the previous one, creating a foundation of faith for the greater confrontations still to come. The story spread through Zarephath in hushed conversations. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, others wondered if their own gods had been at work. But those closest to the event recognized something fundamentally different, a power not tied to temples or seasonal cycles, but to relationship and compassion. As the 3rd year of drought began to weigh upon the land, Elijah sensed a shift in his spirit. The time of hiding and waiting was approaching its end. The lessons of Cherith and Zarephath, God's provision, power, and personal care, had prepared him for the public confrontation that would define his prophetic ministry. Return to Israel, preparing for a showdown. 3 years had passed since Elijah pronounced drought upon the land. 3 years of hidden brooks, faithful ravens, miraculous flour, and a child returned from death. During this time, Israel had descended deeper into suffering and confusion. The people wavered between gods, uncertain where to place their trust as crops failed and hunger spread. The word of the Lord came to Elijah in Zarephath with clarity and purpose. "Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the earth." The time for seclusion had ended. The prophet had been preserved for this moment of public confrontation and divine demonstration. Saying goodbye to the widow and her son proved difficult. They had become family to him, witnesses to his humanity as well as his calling. With promises to return when possible, Elijah blessed their home one final time. The flour bin and oil jar would continue their daily renewal until rain restored the natural order. The journey south took Elijah through a landscape transformed by drought. Once fertile valleys had become dust bowls where nothing grew. Villages stood half abandoned as families had scattered in search of water and food. The prophet walked through this desolation with steady purpose, knowing that renewal waited on the other side of confrontation. As he crossed into Israel's territory, Elijah encountered evidence of Ahab's desperate search for remaining water sources. Royal guards patrolled known springs, rationing access and maintaining order among thirsty citizens. The king's servants requisitioned available food for the palace, while common people grew thin with hunger. Reports reached Elijah about Jezebel's response to the crisis. Rather than questioning her faith in Baal, she had intensified it, slaughtering prophets of Yahweh in rage against their God. Only a handful had survived, hidden in caves by courageous believers who risked their lives to bring them food and water. Among those still serving in the royal court was Obadiah, the king's steward, who secretly maintained faith in the true God. Despite his position, he had used his influence to protect 100 prophets, concealing them in caves and providing bread and water at great personal risk. Divine timing brought Elijah and Obadiah together on a road outside Samaria. The steward had been sent by Ahab to search for grazing land for the remaining royal livestock. When he recognized the prophet, Obadiah fell to his knees in reverence and fear. "Is that you, my lord Elijah?" he asked, hardly believing his eyes. The prophet whom the king had sought throughout every nation and kingdom now stood before him on an open road. It seemed impossible, perhaps even a trap. When Elijah instructed him to announce his return to Ahab, Obadiah hesitated. "As soon as I leave you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you away somewhere I do not know," he protested. "Then when I go tell Ahab and he cannot find you, he will kill me." The steward's fear revealed how dangerous the situation had become. Even high officials could lose their lives to royal anger. Elijah reassured him with a solemn promise. "As the Lord of hosts lives before whom I stand, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." With this assurance, Obadiah hurried to find his king. Meanwhile, Elijah prepared himself spiritually for the confrontation ahead. This would not be merely a meeting between prophet and monarch, but a decisive moment for Israel's spiritual future. When Ahab heard of Elijah's return, he rode out personally to meet him. 3 years of searching, 3 years of drought-stricken rule had not softened the king's heart but hardened it further. His greeting revealed his perspective. "Is that you, O troubler of Israel?" Elijah stood unintimidated before royal power. With the clarity of one who knows his calling, absolutely, he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you and your father's house have, in that you have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and have followed the Baals." In that moment, standing on dusty ground with the king's entourage watching, Elijah issued his challenge, a proposal for the ultimate public demonstration of divine power. "Send and gather all Israel to me on Mount Carmel, the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." The proposal was bold beyond measure. One prophet of Yahweh against 850 prophets of false gods, with all Israel as witness. This would be no private miracle like the flour and oil or even the resurrection of the widow's son. This would be a public contest with national restoration hanging in the balance. To everyone's surprise, Ahab agreed. Perhaps curiosity drove him, or desperation for the promised rain. Perhaps divine influence moved him despite himself. Whatever the reason, messengers were dispatched throughout Israel, summoning people to Mount Carmel for what would become the most dramatic spiritual confrontation in their history. As preparations began, Elijah withdrew to pray. The lessons from Cherith's solitude and Zarephath's household would now serve him on the mountain of decision. All that had come before, the ravens, the brook, the widow's faith, the resurrected child, had prepared him for this defining moment when Israel would finally have to choose between gods. The challenge to Ahab, a call to assemble. After 3 long years of drought, the land of Israel lay parched and hungry. Gardens once lush with life now cracked under the merciless sun. Fields that once gave grain stood empty and barren. The people grew desperate, their spirits as dry as the earth beneath their feet. It was then that God spoke to Elijah, saying, "Go, present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth." Though danger awaited him, Elijah set forth with steady steps towards Samaria, the capital where King Ahab held his throne. The famine gripped the land so severely that even Ahab himself and his steward Obadiah searched for grass to feed the remaining horses and mules. As providence would have it, Obadiah encountered Elijah on the road. This meeting was no accident, but divine timing. "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" Obadiah asked, bowing low to the ground. His voice trembled with both respect and fear, for Obadiah secretly feared the Lord, having hidden 100 prophets in caves during Jezebel's purge. Elijah spoke with calm authority. "It is I. Go tell your master, Elijah is here." Obadiah hesitated, explaining his fear. When I tell Ahab and he cannot find you, he will kill me." The steward knew well the king's relentless search for Elijah throughout neighboring kingdoms and lands. Yet Elijah assured him, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." His words carried no hint of doubt, only serene confidence. When Ahab received word, he rushed to meet Elijah. Their encounter crackled with tension as the king spat his accusation. "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" Elijah stood unmoved by the royal fury. With quiet resolve, he turned the charge back upon the king. "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, by abandoning the commandments of the Lord and following the Baals." Then came the challenge, spoken not as a taunt, but as a summons to witness truth. "Now gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal, and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." Ahab, perhaps curious, perhaps confident in his God's power, agreed. Messengers spread across the land, calling people from villages and towns to come witness an extraordinary contest. The question hanging in the balance: who truly ruled the heavens? The ancient God of their fathers, or the fashionable Baal of their neighbors? As people began their journeys toward Mount Carmel, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Families packed small bundles of food that, though little remained in their storehouses. The elderly leaned on walking sticks as they joined the pilgrimage. Children asked their parents where they were going and why. "To see which God will answer," came the reply. By night, countless campfires dotted the trails leading to Carmel. By day, dust clouds rose from the feet of the travelers. The mountain waited silently as destiny approached its slopes. The prophets of Baal, the powerless gods. Morning light bathed Mount Carmel as the people assembled. The crowd formed a great circle, their faces etched with curiosity and hope. To one side stood the prophets of Baal, adorned in rich vestments with symbols of their storm god. Their jewelry caught the sunlight as they moved. They came with confidence, having enjoyed royal favor for years. Elijah stood alone. His simple garment of camel hair, bound with a leather belt, marked him as different from the ornate priests opposing him. Yet something in his solitary presence commanded attention. His eyes reflected not fear but patient certainty. He approached the center of the gathering and lifted his voice so all could hear. "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if, then follow him." Silence answered him. The people shifted uneasily, unwilling to commit. They had spent years with divided hearts, honoring Baal publicly while secretly remembering the God of their ancestors. Now confronted with a choice, they held their peace. Elijah continued, explaining the terms of the contest with straightforward clarity. "I, even I only, am left as a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose one bull, cut it in pieces, and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on wood, putting no fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord. The God who answers by fire, he is God." The simplicity of the test appealed to the gathered crowd. "It is well spoken," they agreed, nodding their approval. The rules seemed fair. The outcome would be clear. The prophets of Baal chose their bull, prepared it carefully, and placed it on their altar. From morning until noon, they called out, "O Baal, answer us!" Their voices started confident, but grew increasingly desperate as hours passed without response. They leaped around the altar in elaborate dance, their movements becoming more frantic as time wore on. The sun climbed higher, beating down upon their sweat-streaked faces. Still, nothing happened. No voice, no fire, no sign of divine attention. At midday, Elijah began to mock them gently. "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, or busy, or on a journey. Maybe he is asleep and must be awakened." His words carried no malice, just the calm certainty of one who knew the outcome. The prophets of Baal responded with greater frenzy. They cut themselves with swords and lances, following their custom, until blood flowed. Their cries grew hoarse as afternoon shadows lengthened across the mountain. They prophesied in ecstatic trances until the time for the evening sacrifice. Still nothing happened. No fire fell, no voice spoke. The altar remained just wood and meat under the indifferent sky. The people watched this display with growing disillusionment. Some who came believing in Baal's power now whispered doubts to their neighbors. Children who had been frightened by the wild display now simply looked bored. Even the most devoted followers of Baal glanced nervously at one another as their prophets' voices grew raw from shouting. As shadows lengthened, exhaustion claimed the prophets of Baal. Their movements slowed, their voices faltered. The crowd sensed the shift from confidence to desperation. What began as a demonstration of power had become a painful display of helplessness. In the silence that finally fell, all eyes turned to Elijah. The time had come for the Lord's prophet to take his turn. Elijah's altar, a prayer for fire. As evening approached, Elijah called the people to gather around him. "Come near to me," he invited, his voice gentle yet carrying to the farthest listener. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by his calm demeanor after the frantic display they had witnessed all day. With deliberate movements, Elijah began rebuilding an ancient altar that had fallen into disrepair. He chose 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, reminding the people of their united heritage before the kingdom divided. His hands worked with purpose, placing each stone with care and reverence. Around the altar, he dug a trench wide enough to hold 2 measures of seed. The people watched in curious silence, wondering at this additional preparation. Unlike the elaborate rituals of Baal's prophets, Elijah worked with simple, unhurried movements. He arranged the wood thoughtfully, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then came the unexpected command: fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the offering and on the wood. Eyebrows raised among the onlookers. Water was precious after 3 years of drought, yet Elijah called for it to be poured on the very materials meant to burn. The assistants did as instructed, watching the water soak into the sacrifice and wood. "Do it a second time," Elijah directed. Again, water cascaded over the altar. "Do it a third time," he said, his face serene. By now, water filled the trench around the altar. The wood was soaked through, the meat glistening with moisture. Any natural fire would find it impossible to ignite such a drenched offering. The crowd whispered among themselves. Some wondered if the prophet had lost his mind, others if this was some trick. But all watched intently, sensing something momentous approaching. As the evening sacrifice hour arrived, Elijah stepped forward. No dancing, no shouting, no self-inflicted wounds marked his approach to God. Instead, he simply prayed, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed mountainside. "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back." The prayer lasted less than 30 seconds. Brief, direct, honest. No performance, just connection. In the heartbeat of silence that followed, heaven opened. Fire fell from above, not gentle flames, but consuming, brilliant light. It burned the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust. It licked up the water that filled the trench. The mountain itself seemed to tremble at the display of divine power. The people fell on their faces before this undeniable sign. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Their voices joined in acknowledgement, the sound rolling across the mountainside like thunder. In that moment, hearts long divided found clarity. The fire had not only consumed the sacrifice, but burned away confusion and compromise. The truth stood revealed in flames too bright to deny. Elijah's face, illuminated by the divine fire, showed no surprise, just quiet vindication and perhaps a touch of sorrow for what must come next. The fire from heaven, the unmistakable sign. The fire that fell from heaven changed everything. Within moments, what had been impossible became undeniable. The soaked altar completely consumed. The water evaporated. The stones scorched. Nothing remained but ash and wonder. The people remained prostrate, their foreheads pressed to the earth in reverence and fear. Some wept openly, overwhelmed by the display of power and the realization of how far they had strayed. Others whispered prayers, rediscovering words long forgotten. Elijah allowed them this moment of recognition before speaking again. When he did, his voice carried the weight of divine judgment. "Seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape." The crowd, so recently convinced of Baal's emptiness and the Lord's reality, complied without hesitation. The same prophets who had danced confidently hours before now found themselves surrounded, their fine robes offering no protection against grasping hands. Elijah led them down to the brook Kishon, a seasonal stream at the base of Mount Carmel. There, according to the law of Moses regarding false prophets who led Israel astray, they met their end. The water ran red as justice was served, harsh by modern standards but consistent with the covenant penalties Israel had accepted. As this grim task concluded, Elijah turned to King Ahab, who had watched the entire contest in stunned silence. "Go up, eat and drink, for there is the sound of the rushing of rain." Though no cloud yet appeared, Elijah spoke with perfect certainty. While Ahab departed to take refreshment, Elijah climbed higher up Mount Carmel, seeking solitude for prayer. At the summit, he bent down, placing his head between his knees in intense, humble supplication. This posture revealed another side of the prophet, not just the bold challenger, but the earnest intercessor. He sent his servant to look toward the sea. "Go up now, look toward the sea," he instructed. The servant went, observed the horizon, and returned. "There is nothing," he reported. "Go again," Elijah said. 7 times he sent his servant, showing persistence in prayer even after the dramatic answer of fire. 6 times the servant returned with the same report: nothing. On the 7th journey, everything changed. "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea," the servant reported, his voice quickening with excitement. Elijah immediately understood the significance of this tiny sign. "Go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you." Within minutes, the sky darkened with clouds. Wind swept across the mountaintop, bending trees and whipping at garments. The small cloud had multiplied into a storm front, advancing rapidly from the Mediterranean. The people still lingering on the mountainside looked up in amazement. Many had never seen rain in their adult lives, the drought having lasted so long. Children pointed excitedly at the darkening sky, asking questions their parents could barely answer through tears of relief. King Ahab hurried to his chariot as the first heavy drops began to fall. The dry earth received them with almost audible gratitude, dust transforming instantly to mud. The smell of rain on parched ground rose like nature's incense. As torrents began to fall, Elijah, strengthened by the Lord, gathered up his robes and ran ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way to Jezreel. His feet barely seemed to touch the ground as he sprinted through the downpour, an unmistakable sign to all who witnessed it that divine power accompanied this humble prophet. The rain continued through the night, soaking deeply into the cracked soil. Streams long dry began to flow again. Cisterns and reservoirs began to fill. The land drank deeply after its long thirst. In homes across Israel, families gathered by doorways and windows, watching the rain fall with wonder and gratitude. Many remembered the prayers they had offered during the drought years. Now those prayers found answer in the steady rhythm of water falling from heaven. The end of the drought, rain, repentance, and redemption. The rain fell for days, gentle and steady, not the destructive torrents that cause flash floods, but the nurturing kind that soaks deeply into soil. Israel drank in the moisture like a person revived after nearly dying of thirst. Farmers ventured into long-abandoned fields, testing the soil between their fingers with cautious hope. Women brought out containers to catch rainwater, their eyes bright with the promise of clean washing and cooking again. Children splashed in puddles, experiencing for the first time the simple joy of rain play. In villages across the land, people gathered to share stories of the contest on Mount Carmel. Those who witnessed it firsthand spoke with reverence of the fire from heaven. Those hearing it secondhand listened with wide eyes, asking questions about every detail. The story spread like ripples in water, reaching even the most remote settlements. Many homes removed their household Baal idols, burying them or breaking them to pieces. Abandoned altars to the Lord were cleared of weeds and rebuilt. Elders who remembered the old ways of worship taught younger generations the forgotten prayers and rituals of their ancestors. Yet in the palace at Jezreel, darkness gathered. When King Ahab told Queen Jezebel all that Elijah had done, the contest, the fire, the slaying of her prophets, her face hardened with fury. She sent a messenger to Elijah with a chilling vow. "So may the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow." The message reached Elijah as he rested, perhaps already sensing the queen's reaction. This threat from the most powerful woman in the kingdom struck fear even in the heart of the prophet who had called down fire. The Bible honestly records that He was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life. This human moment reminds us that even the greatest spiritual champions experience fear, and doubt. After tremendous victory often comes vulnerability. Elijah had stood alone against hundreds, yet now he fled from one woman's threat. As Elijah departed southward toward the wilderness, the land continued its healing. New green shoots pushed through soil in fields long barren. Small flowers appeared on hillsides. Farmers prepared planting seeds they had carefully preserved through the drought years. In streams and wadies, water flowed again. Fish returned to pools where they had vanished years before. Birds gathered at water's edges, their songs adding to the sense of renewal. The ecosystem, so damaged by years without rain, began its slow recovery. The drought had served its purpose, calling a wayward people back to their God through hardship when prosperity had led them astray. Now the blessing of rain served as both reward for returning and invitation to continue the journey of faithfulness. Scattered across Israel, families who had lost members to starvation during the drought held memorial services, finally able to properly grieve now that survival was no longer their only focus. The rain brought not just physical relief, but emotional healing, washing away years of accumulated pain. Some scholars sought out copies of the Torah scrolls, dust-covered and neglected during the years of Baal worship. They read again the promises and warnings given through Moses centuries before. Blessings for faithfulness, consequences for turning away. The recent events had proven these ancient words true. In markets reopening after years of scarcity, people exchanged not just goods, but stories. Where were you when the fire fell became a common question. What did you feel when the rain began? Many described a sense of shame followed by gratitude. Shame for having doubted the God of their ancestors, gratitude for second chances. Meanwhile, Elijah journeyed toward his own personal wilderness, unaware that his greatest spiritual lessons still awaited him. The contest at Carmel had been spectacular, but God's next revelation would come in a very different form, not in fire or storm, but in gentle whisper. As stars appeared over a land drinking deeply of long-awaited rain, the people of Israel slept more peacefully than they had in years. The drought had ended, the rain of renewal had come, and though challenges remained, hope had been restored to a thirsty land. Jezebel's wrath, a queen's vow of vengeance. Ahab hurried back to his palace in Jezreel as the storm clouds gathered. His royal garments still damp from the downpour that had ended the drought, he found Queen Jezebel waiting. Her eyes narrowed as he told her everything: the contest on Mount Carmel, the failed prayers of her prophets, the fire from heaven, and how Elijah had led the people to execute all 450 prophets of Baal. The queen's rage grew with each word. Her breathing quickened, her jeweled fingers gripping the armrests of her chair. Jezebel had brought the worship of Baal from her homeland of Sidon. These were her prophets, her priests, her gods that had been humiliated. This was more than a religious defeat. It was a personal insult. In the soft glow of oil lamps, she summoned a messenger. The man knelt before her, head bowed. "Go to Elijah," she commanded, her voice low and steady. "Tell him that by this time tomorrow, I swear by the gods that I will make his life like the lives of those he killed. Let him know that Jezebel does not forget, and Jezebel does not forgive." Night had fallen across Israel. Stars peeked through the clearing skies, witnesses to the queen's oath. The messenger traveled through darkness, seeking the prophet who had just won his greatest victory. He found Elijah still near Jezreel, perhaps resting after his triumph, perhaps waiting for the king's response. The prophet's face changed as he heard the queen's message. This was not how the story was supposed to continue. Fire from heaven had fallen, the rain had returned, the people had cried out that the Lord was God. Yet the queen remained unmoved, her power unbroken, her determination only strengthened. Fear entered Elijah's heart, not a small worry, but a deep consuming dread. This man who had faced down hundreds of false prophets, who had called fire from heaven, who had outrun the king's chariot, now trembled at the words of one determined woman. Perhaps he had hoped for complete victory, for Ahab's repentance, for Jezebel's downfall. Instead, he found himself still hunted, still threatened. Sometimes our greatest challenges come not in our weakest moments, but right after our greatest triumphs. So it was with Elijah, who had gone from the height of prophetic power to the depth of human fear in less than a day. As the night wrapped around him like a cloak, Elijah made his decision. He would run, not toward his mission, but away from it, not with faith, but with fear. The prophet who had stood fearless before kings now fled before a queen's threat. His sandaled feet carried him south, away from Jezreel, away from Jezebel, away from the land where he had just witnessed God's mighty power. Sometimes even the strongest among us need to retreat. Sometimes even the most faithful need time to remember what they believe. Elijah's flight was not the end of his story, but rather the beginning of a deeper journey, one that would take him through despair and into a more intimate connection with the God he served. As stars wheeled above him in the night sky, Elijah ran, his shadow stretching behind him in the moonlight. God watched his prophet flee, yet did not abandon him. The journey ahead would test Elijah in ways that fire from heaven never could. Elijah's flight, the desert of despair. Elijah's feet carried him south beyond the borders of the northern kingdom. He passed through Judah, the sister kingdom still faithful to David's line. But even there he did not feel safe from Jezebel's reach. Her family had marriage ties to Judah's royal house. Nowhere felt safe enough. So he continued south into Beersheba, at the very edge of settled lands. There, in this border town, Elijah left his servant. The journey ahead would be solo, a path he needed to walk alone. We all face wilderness moments in life when companions cannot follow, when the path ahead must be walked in solitude. From Beersheba, Elijah pushed into the Negev desert. One day's journey he walked until his legs would carry him no further. The sun beat down, a different kind of fire than the one he had called from heaven. This heat did not confirm God's presence. It simply drained Elijah's remaining strength. Under a solitary broom tree, the prophet finally collapsed. This small desert bush offered meager shade, but it was enough for Elijah to rest his weary body. His water skin nearly empty, his food gone, his strength spent, Elijah looked up through the sparse branches toward the harsh blue sky. "It is enough now, O Lord," he whispered, his voice cracking from thirst. "Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors." The words fell from his lips like stones. The mighty prophet who had raised the dead, brought fire from heaven, and ended a drought, now begged for death in the desert. How quickly triumph can turn to despair. How easily confidence can crumble into doubt. Elijah had measured himself and found his courage wanting. He had run rather than stand. He had fled rather than fight. And now in his eyes he deserved nothing but to die forgotten under a desert shrub. Sleep came to him then, the heavy sleep of complete exhaustion. His dreams were empty, his body still. The desert wind played with his hair and beard as he slept, the same wind that had once carried the sound of heavy rain. Now it carried only heat and dust. But Elijah was not alone in that wilderness. Eyes watched over him as he slept. The God who had answered by fire had not abandoned his prophet in the desert. Divine help often comes when we have reached the end of our own strength, when we have nothing left to give. A touch woke Elijah. He opened his eyes to see a figure beside him, not threatening but gentle. "Arise and eat," the messenger said, pointing to a small loaf of bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water placed by his head. Where they had come from, how they had been prepared in this barren place, these questions did not matter to the hungry prophet. Elijah ate and drank, the simple meal tasting better than any royal feast. Then, strength partially restored, he lay down again. The desert day continued its scorching course across the sky. Elijah slept once more, his body still recovering from fear, flight, and fatigue. A second time, the touch came. A second time, the voice. "Arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you." Elijah's eyes opened to see the bread and water replenished. This was no ordinary meal. This was food with purpose, sustenance with promise. Elijah ate and drank deeply. As the water passed his lips and the bread filled his stomach, strength flowed back into his limbs. Not just ordinary strength, but a deep, lasting energy that would carry him far beyond normal human endurance. Rising to his feet, Elijah felt the food working within him. The messenger was gone, but the message remained. There was a journey ahead, one too great for human strength alone. Divine provision had been given for divine purpose. Turning farther south, Elijah began walking again. His stride strengthened with each step. Days passed, yet he did not hunger. Nights came, yet he did not tire beyond recovery. 40 days and 40 nights he traveled, the same span that Moses had spent on the mountain receiving God's law. His destination was clear now, pulled as if by an unseen thread. He was traveling to Horeb, the mountain of God, the place where Moses had received the covenant. There, perhaps, he would find answers. There, perhaps, he would reconnect with the God whose cause seemed lost in Israel. The desert, which had first been his place of despair, became the path to revelation. Sometimes our lowest points become corridors leading to our deepest insights. What begins as escape can transform into pilgrimage. So it was for Elijah as his feet carried him ever closer to the holy mountain. The broom tree. Exhaustion and the angelic visit. The broom tree that had sheltered Elijah stood alone in the desert, its scraggly branches reaching upward like supplicating hands. This humble bush, offering thin shade in a barren land, became a sacred space, a sanctuary where heaven touched earth, where divine care met human need. Many seek God in temples and palaces, but sometimes he reveals himself in the humblest settings. A stable in Bethlehem, a well in Samaria, a bush in the desert. The broom tree moment reminds us that God's presence isn't limited to grand structures or formal worship. He finds us where we are, even when where we are is a place of retreat. Elijah's deep sleep beneath those branches wasn't merely physical rest, it was surrender, a letting go. His body and spirit had reached their limits. No strategies remained, no plans formulated in his mind, only exhaustion, raw and complete. Yet this very emptiness created space for divine intervention. The angel's touch was gentle, no thunderclap or trumpet blast announced the heavenly visitor. Just a quiet presence, a soft touch, a simple instruction: arise and eat. God often speaks not in dramatic declarations but in practical guidance for the next step. The bread and water, simple provisions, carried symbolic weight. They represented God's sustaining grace, his attention to basic needs before spiritual revelations. When Elijah ate the first time, he satisfied immediate hunger. But when the angel woke him again with the same gentle touch, the message deepened: the journey is too great for you. These words acknowledged what Elijah already knew. His task exceeded human capacity. The second meal wasn't just nourishment, it was empowerment. The food's supernatural quality became evident as Elijah traveled 40 days on its strength. This wasn't merely caloric energy, but divine sustenance. The number 40 echoes throughout Scripture. 40 days of rain in Noah's time, 40 years in the wilderness for Israel, 40 days of temptation for Jesus. It marks periods of testing, transformation, and transition. What thoughts filled Elijah's mind during those 40 days of walking? Perhaps memories of past victories now seeming hollow. Perhaps questions about God's plan for Israel. Perhaps simply the rhythm of feet on sand, the whisper of wind, the silent companionship of a God who had not abandoned him despite his flight. The desert itself became Elijah's teacher. Its harsh landscape stripped away distractions. Its silence invited reflection. Its vastness put problems into perspective. Sometimes God leads us into desert places not to punish us, but to speak to us without competition from other voices. With each passing day, Elijah moved farther from Jezebel's threat, but closer to God's presence. His physical journey mirrored an inner pilgrimage, from fear toward faith, from despair toward hope, from flight toward purpose. The broom tree had marked the turning point, the moment when retreat began transforming into return. As he approached Mount Horeb, Elijah was not the same man who had collapsed in despair. The desert had changed him. The angel's provision had sustained him. The solitude had prepared him. He was ready now for what awaited at the mountain of God, not with the brash confidence of Mount Carmel, but with the quiet readiness of one who had faced his own limitations and found God faithful still. The still small voice, revelation on Mount Horeb. Mount Horeb rose from the desert floor, ancient and imposing. This was the mountain of God, where Moses had received the law, where a bush burned without being consumed. Now Elijah approached its rugged slopes, his beard longer, his skin darkened by 40 days in the sun. He found a cave on the mountainside and made it his temporary home. The cool darkness welcomed him after weeks under open sky. Here, surrounded by stone walls, Elijah waited. For what, he wasn't entirely sure. Direction, perhaps? Reassurance, maybe? Or simply rest before whatever came next. The word of the Lord found him there. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Not an accusation, but an invitation to pour out his heart. God often asks questions not to gain information he doesn't have, but to give us the chance to articulate our deepest thoughts. Elijah's answer spilled forth the words he had likely rehearsed during his desert journey. I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. The people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away. His complaint contained partial truths wrapped in self-pity. Yes, Israel had strayed. Yes, prophets had been killed. Yes, his life was threatened. But was he truly alone? Was the situation as hopeless as he painted it? Sometimes our darkest moments distort our perspective. Go out, came the divine instruction, and stand on the mountain before the Lord. Elijah obeyed, moving from the cave's shelter to the exposed mountainside. There, the drama began to unfold. A great wind tore into the mountain so powerful it split rocks and scattered stones. Elijah braced himself against its force. Surely this was God's presence, this display of power. But the text tells us the Lord was not in the wind. The wind subsided, giving way to an earthquake. The ground beneath Elijah trembled and shook. Rocks tumbled down slopes, dust rose in clouds. Again, Elijah might have expected God's voice to speak through this awesome display. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake, fire swept across the mountainside. Flames licked at scrubby vegetation, heat waves distorted the air. Fire, like what had consumed Elijah's sacrifice on Mount Carmel. Yet the Lord was not in the fire. Wind, earthquake, fire, all powerful forces, all potential carriers of divine presence. Yet all passed by without God speaking through them. Then came something unexpected, a gentle whisper. Some translations call it a still small voice or the sound of sheer silence. After the chaos of natural forces, this quiet sound drew Elijah's attention like nothing else could. Covering his face with his cloak, a gesture of reverence in God's presence, Elijah stepped to the cave entrance. Now the question came again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" The same words, but perhaps heard differently after the mountain's lesson in divine communication. Elijah repeated his complaint, word for word. Sometimes our grievances are so deeply felt that even divine encounters don't immediately shift our perspective. God listened patiently to the repeated lament, then responded not with rebuke, but with direction. "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus," God instructed. Specific tasks followed: anoint Hazael as king over Syria, anoint Jehu as king over Israel, anoint Elisha as prophet to succeed Elijah. Each appointment represented part of God's ongoing work that would continue with or without Elijah's participation. Then came the gentle correction to Elijah's perspective. "Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him." The prophet was not alone. God had preserved a faithful remnant, though hidden from Elijah's sight. The revelation on Horeb taught Elijah crucial lessons. God works not just through dramatic displays, but through quiet persistence. He speaks not just in spectacular moments, but in whispered guidance. And his plans unfold across generations through many servants, not resting on any single prophet's shoulders. As the sun set behind the ancient peak, Elijah understood. His role remained important, but not all important. God's work would continue. The story was bigger than one man's triumph or failure. With this humbler perspective, Elijah prepared to descend the mountain, ready to follow the quiet voice that had reminded him who was truly in control. The appointment of Elisha, the successor chosen. Elijah came down from the mountain a changed man. The weight of being Israel's sole defender had lifted somewhat from his shoulders. God had other servants, other plans in motion. The prophet's steps were steadier now, his purpose clearer, as he journeyed north through the wilderness toward Damascus. The first two tasks God had given him, anointing Hazael as king over Syria and Jehu as king of Israel, would wait for now. It was the third commission that drew Elijah forward, finding Elisha, the man who would continue his work when he was gone. Days passed as Elijah traveled. The barren wilderness gave way to more fertile lands. Fields appeared, then villages. Signs of human activity increased. The prophet moved through these settled areas quietly, his eyes watchful, his heart attuned to divine guidance. Then, near Abel Mahola, Elijah spotted a scene of agricultural activity. 12 yoke of oxen plowed a field, moving in rhythmic harmony across the earth. Behind the last pair walked a man, strong, focused, guiding the powerful beast with practiced hands. This was Elisha, son of Shaphat, working his father's land, unaware that his life was about to change forever. Elijah paused, watching. This ordinary farmer would become God's voice to kings. These hands that held plow reins would someday perform miracles. The divine choice often surprises us, finding future leaders in fields rather than palaces, by fishing boats rather than in temples. Walking across the newly turned soil, Elijah approached the last team of oxen. Without ceremony or explanation, he removed his mantle, the rough outer garment that marked him as a prophet, and threw it over Elisha's shoulders. No words accompanied this action. None were needed. Both men understood the significance. The mantle was more than clothing. It represented prophetic calling, divine authority, spiritual power. By placing it on Elisha, Elijah was saying, God has chosen you to follow in my path. Simple yet profound, this symbolic act changed everything. Elisha's response revealed his character. He didn't hesitate or make excuses. Instead, he left the oxen standing in the field and ran after Elijah, who had already turned to continue his journey. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," Elisha called, "and then I will follow you." Elijah turned, his face neither welcoming nor forbidding. "Go back," he replied. "What have I done to you?" The words seem cryptic, but their meaning runs deep. Elijah was saying, consider what you're doing. This is between you and God. The choice must be yours. Elisha understood. Returning to his oxen, he made a decisive break with his former life. He slaughtered the pair he had been driving, valuable animals representing significant wealth. Using their wooden yoke as fuel, he built a fire and cooked their meat. This was no small sacrifice, but a public declaration that he would not return to farming. Gathering the people, likely his workers and family, Elisha shared the meat with them in a farewell feast. This meal marked transition, celebrated calling, acknowledged the cost of following God's path. When it was finished, Elisha rose, embraced his parents one last time, and went after Elijah to serve him. The relationship that formed between these two men would become one of Scripture's great spiritual mentorships. Elisha didn't immediately step into prophetic shoes. Instead, he became Elijah's servant, learning through observation, through daily tasks, through proximity to a man who walked with God. This pattern of service before leadership, of apprenticeship before authority, echoes throughout biblical history. Joshua served Moses, Timothy served Paul. Even Jesus washed his disciples' feet. True spiritual leadership grows through humble service, not grasping for position. For Elijah, finding Elisha brought comfort. The burden of Israel's spiritual future no longer rested on his shoulders alone. God's work would continue beyond his lifetime. The mantle would pass to worthy hands. Sometimes our greatest act of faith is preparing others to carry on when we are gone. As the two prophets traveled together, the older and the younger, the established and the emerging, God's plan unfolded. Elijah still had work to do, confrontations to face, words to speak to kings. But now he did so with the knowledge that what God had begun through him would continue through another. The fields of Abel Mahola faded behind them. Ahead lay years of partnership, of teaching and learning, of shared purpose. Elijah's lonely days had ended. God had provided not just direction, but companionship for the journey ahead. A gift perhaps as precious as the fire from heaven or the still small voice. Naboth's vineyard. Greed and injustice. Near the palace in Jezreel stood a small vineyard. Its owner, Naboth, had tended these vines for years. The land held deep meaning for him. It was his family's heritage, passed down through many hands before reaching his own. Each vine told a story of his ancestors who had worked this same soil. King Ahab often walked past this plot of land. From his window, he could see the neat rows of grapevines turning green in spring and purple in harvest time. One day, a thought took hold in his mind. How perfect this spot would be for a garden of herbs so close to the royal grounds. The king approached Naboth with what seemed a fair offer. "Give me your vineyard," he said. "I'll pay you well, or trade you for better land elsewhere if you wish." But Naboth shook his head. "The Lord forbids me from giving away the land of my fathers." His voice was firm, but respectful. Ahab returned to his palace, sulking like a child denied a toy. He lay on his bed, turned his face to the wall, and refused to eat. Such was the king of Israel, a man with everything, undone by the one small thing he couldn't have. Jezebel found her husband in this sorry state. "Why are you so downcast?" she asked. When Ahab explained about Naboth's refusal, a cruel smile crossed her face. "Is this how you show your power as king? Get up, eat something, and be cheerful. I will get you Naboth's vineyard." She wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed with the royal seal. These messages went to the elders and nobles of Jezreel, ordering them to proclaim a fast. They were to seat Naboth in a place of honor, then have 2 men accuse him of cursing God and the king. The punishment would be swift, death by stoning. The plan unfolded just as Jezebel had written. False witnesses spoke against Naboth. Stones flew through the air. A good man died for the crime of keeping his family's land. His sons too were killed, leaving no heirs to claim the vineyard. Jezebel's news was brief and to the point. "Naboth is dead. Go take his vineyard." Ahab rose quickly and went to claim his prize. As he walked among the vines that would soon be uprooted for his garden, he felt eyes upon him. Turning, he saw a familiar figure standing at the edge of the field. Elijah. The king's heart sank. He knew why the prophet had come. "Have you found me, my enemy?" Ahab asked. Elijah's reply cut through the still air. "I have found you, because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the sight of the Lord." The prophet's words fell like stones, heavier than those that had taken Naboth's life. Dogs would lick Ahab's blood where they had licked Naboth's. Every male in Ahab's family would be cut off. Dogs would eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. The dynasty of Omri would be wiped away like a dish that is wiped clean and turned upside down. As Elijah spoke, Ahab felt the weight of judgment press upon him. For once, the king's heart softened. He tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and walked about humbly. His steps were slow, his head bowed low. The vineyard no longer seemed worth the price he had paid. Ahab's false repentance, the hollow words of a king. The sight of Ahab in sackcloth turned heads throughout Samaria. People whispered as he passed. The mighty king now walked with shuffling steps, his eyes downcast. He fasted and lay in rough cloth, the picture of a penitent man. Word of this change reached Elijah on the windswept hills, where he often went to pray. The Lord spoke to him there, asking, "Have you seen how Ahab has humbled himself before me?" Because of this show of remorse, the Lord would hold back the promised disaster during Ahab's lifetime. The judgment would fall instead on his son's house. Such mercy was granted not because the repentance was deep, but because God honors even the smallest turn toward truth. Yet Ahab's heart had not truly changed. Like morning dew that vanishes with the rising sun, his humility evaporated quickly. Soon he was back to his old ways, listening to false prophets who told him what he wished to hear. 3 years passed without war between Israel and Syria. In this time of peace, King Jehoshaphat of Judah came north to visit Ahab. The 2 kings sat in their royal robes at the entrance of Samaria's gate while prophets performed before them. Ahab saw an opportunity. "Will you go with me to fight at Ramoth-Gilead?" he asked Jehoshaphat. The king of Judah agreed, but wisely suggested they first seek the Lord's guidance. Ahab gathered 400 prophets who served at his pleasure. With one voice they cried, "Go up to Ramoth-Gilead and triumph. The Lord will give it into your hand." But Jehoshaphat was not satisfied. "Is there no prophet of the Lord, we might ask?" Ahab's face darkened. "There is one man, Micaiah son of Imlah, but I hate him because he never prophesies anything good about me." While they waited for Micaiah, a prophet named Zedekiah made iron horns and pranced about, shouting that Ahab would push the Syrians until they were destroyed. The other prophets nodded eagerly, knowing what the king wanted to hear. When Micaiah arrived, he at first echoed their words, but something in his tone made Ahab demand the truth. Micaiah's face grew solemn. "I saw all Israel scattered on the mountains like sheep without a shepherd." He described a heavenly scene where the Lord allowed a lying spirit to fill the mouths of all Ahab's prophets to lure him to his death. Zedekiah struck Micaiah on the cheek. Ahab ordered the truthful prophet imprisoned until his safe return. Micaiah's parting words hung in the air. "If you return in peace, the Lord has not spoken by me." Ahab's false repentance had led him here, still seeking to bend truth to his will, still surrounding himself with voices that would tell him only what he wished to hear. The fall of Ahab, prophecies fulfilled. Morning broke over the hills of Ramoth-Gilead. Dew sparkled on grass soon to be trampled by the feet of warriors. Ahab prepared for battle with an unusual request. Though dressed as king many times before, today he asked to fight disguised as a common soldier. "But you wear your robes," he told Jehoshaphat. Was this wisdom or cowardice? Perhaps Ahab remembered Micaiah's words. Perhaps he thought to outwit fate by hiding from it. The king of Syria had given his commanders one order: fight with no one small or great, but only with the king of Israel. Throughout the day, they searched for Ahab's royal garments. Several times they surrounded Jehoshaphat, who cried out when attacked. Realizing he was not their target, they turned away. Ahab might have smiled beneath his helmet, thinking himself clever. Then it happened, a moment that proved no one can hide from destiny. An archer drew back his bow and let fly an arrow. He aimed at no one in particular, just shot into the mass of Israel's troops. The arrow found the tiny gap between Ahab's armor and breastplate. "Turn around and carry me out of the battle," the king whispered to his chariot driver. "I am wounded." Blood pooled at Ahab's feet as the battle raged on. He propped himself up in his chariot, facing the Syrians, not wanting his troops to lose heart. By sunset, the king of Israel was dead. As Ahab's chariot was washed by the pool of Samaria, dogs came to lick up his blood, just as Elijah had said. The news traveled quickly throughout the land. Some mourned, others nodded silently, remembering Naboth's vineyard. Most simply wondered what would come next. Ahaziah, Ahab's son, became king in his place. The crown passed to new hands, but the shadow of Elijah's prophecy still loomed over the house of Ahab. From his quiet place on the mountains, Elijah watched these events unfold. One king falls, another rises. The pattern had repeated since time began. Yet the prophet knew this story was far from over. The downfall of Jezebel, a queen's end, years passed since Ahab's death. Ahaziah had ruled briefly before falling through a lattice in his upper chamber. Now Jehoram, another son of Ahab, sat on Israel's throne. Through it all, Jezebel remained a power behind the scenes, her influence as strong as ever. The queen mother still painted her eyes with dark kohl and adorned her head with jewels. She still worshipped Baal and despised the God of Israel. Time had not softened her heart or dimmed her pride. Far from Jezreel, events were unfolding that would soon reach the palace gates. Elijah had been taken up to heaven in a whirlwind, but his work continued through Elisha. And now, at God's command, Elisha sent a young prophet to find a military commander named Jehu. The young man found Jehu sitting with his fellow officers. "I have a message for you, commander," he said, pulling Jehu into a private room. There he poured oil on Jehu's head and spoke words that would change everything. "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anoint you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel." He told Jehu his mission: to strike down the house of Ahab, to avenge the blood of the prophets and all the servants of the Lord at Jezebel's hand. He finished with words that had waited years to be fulfilled: "The dog shall eat Jezebel in the territory of Jezreel, and none shall bury her." Then he opened the door and fled. Jehu's men asked what this madman had wanted. When Jehu told them, they quickly spread their garments on the bare steps for him to stand on. They blew the trumpet and proclaimed, "Jehu is king." The newly anointed king wasted no time. He rode his chariot furiously toward Jezreel, where both King Jehoram of Israel and King Ahaziah of Judah happened to be visiting. As the dust cloud of his approach grew visible, a watchman called out from the tower. Messengers were sent to ask if Jehu came in peace. Each messenger joined Jehu instead of returning. "The driving is like the driving of Jehu son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously," the watchman reported. When the kings rode out to meet him, Jehu's arrow found Jehoram's heart. Ahaziah fled, but was struck down as well. The revolution had begun. Jezebel heard the commotion. She knew what was coming. Rather than hide or flee, she painted her eyes, arranged her hair, and looked out an upper window. As Jehu entered the gate, she called down to him, "Is it peace, you Zimri, murderer of your master?" Jehu looked up. "Who is on my side? Who?" 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. "Throw her down," Jehu commanded. They seized the queen who had once struck fear in prophets' hearts. Without ceremony, they pushed her through the window. Jezebel fell to the courtyard below. Her blood spattered on the wall and on the horses. Jehu's chariot rolled over her. Later, when Jehu said, "See now to this cursed woman and bury her, for she was a king's daughter," his servants found almost nothing left. Dogs had eaten her flesh, leaving only her skull, feet, and palms. Elijah's word, spoken years before beside Naboth's vineyard, had come to pass completely. Elisha's rising influence, the passing of the mantle. The road from Jericho to Bethel wound through rocky hills. Along this path walked Elijah and Elisha, master and student, prophet and successor. Both men knew that this day was unlike any other. A strange energy hung in the air, a sense that something momentous approached. "Stay here," Elijah told his student at each town they visited. "The Lord has sent me farther on." Each time, Elisha gave the same reply: "As the Lord lives and as you yourself live, I will not leave you." The sons of the prophets, students who gathered around these holy men, approached Elisha with knowing looks. "Do you understand that today the Lord will take your master away from you?" "Yes, I know it," Elisha answered. "Now be silent." At the Jordan, Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water. The river parted, allowing them to cross on dry ground. On the other side, Elijah turned to his faithful shadow. "Ask what I shall do for you before I am taken from you." Without hesitation, Elisha replied, "Please let there be a double portion of your spirit on me." Elijah nodded slowly. "You have asked the hard thing. Yet if you see me as I am being taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if you do not see me, it shall not be so." As they walked on, talking together, a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared. In a moment, Elijah was swept up in a whirlwind into heaven. Elisha saw it all. My father, he cried out, "the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." When the dust settled and the sky closed, Elisha found himself alone. At his feet lay Elijah's cloak, fallen when the prophet was taken up. He picked it up, this simple garment that had parted waters. Taking it to the Jordan, he struck the water as he had seen his master do. "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he asked. The waters parted. Elisha crossed over. The watching sons of the prophets bowed low before him. "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," they said to one another. In the days that followed, Elisha healed bitter waters with salt. He called bears from the woods to punish youths who mocked him. He filled ditches with water for a thirsty army and made a widow's oil multiply to pay her debts. He promised a child to a barren woman and later raised that same child from death. Where Elijah had been like fire, sudden, bright, consuming, Elisha moved among the people. Where his master had lived in wilderness and caves, Elisha often stayed in towns, teaching the sons of the prophets. His miracles touched daily life, healing stew, finding lost axe heads, curing leprosy. The mantle had passed, the work continued in new hands. Yet both prophets served the same unchanging God. Both called Israel back to true worship. Both stood against kings when needed. And far to the north in the heavenly realms, Elijah watched his successor work. Perhaps he smiled to see how the double portion was being used. Perhaps he knew that someday, in God's perfect timing, he would have one more task to perform on earth. The final days of Elijah, a prophet's last walk. As the sun cast long shadows across the hills of Gilgal, Elijah knew his time on earth was drawing to a close. The air seemed different that morning, crisper, filled with whispers of what was to come. The aging prophet turned to his faithful companion Elisha, his eyes reflecting years of divine service. "Stay here," Elijah said softly, "for the Lord has sent me to Bethel." His voice carried no command, merely an invitation to respect the sacred journey he was about to undertake. But Elisha sensed the significance of this day. "As surely as the Lord lives and as you live," he replied with quiet determination, "I will not leave you." The bond between master and student had grown too deep for separation now. Together they walked the dusty path to Bethel, their footsteps matching in rhythm, their silence comfortable. In Bethel, the sons of the prophets approached Elisha, drawing him aside with knowing glances. "Do you understand?" they whispered. "The Lord will take your master from you today." Elisha nodded slowly. "Yes, I know," he answered. "Now please be silent." He didn't need reminders of what his heart already understood. The journey continued to Jericho, with Elijah once again suggesting Elisha remain behind. Once more, the loyal disciple refused. The pattern repeated when they reached the Jordan River, a test of devotion that Elisha passed without hesitation. As they stood at the riverbank, 50 sons of the prophets watched from a distance, witnesses to history unfolding. These men had studied under Elijah, learned from his wisdom, observed his courage. Now they gathered to honor his final hours among them. Elijah removed his cloak, the mantle that had become synonymous with his prophetic office. He folded the weathered fabric carefully, then struck the waters of the Jordan. The river parted before them, creating a path of dry ground between flowing walls of water. Master and disciple crossed over, alone now, leaving behind the world of ordinary men. On the eastern shore, their footprints marked the beginning of the last earthly trail Elijah would ever walk. "Ask what I may do for you," Elijah said gently, "before I am taken from you." Elisha didn't hesitate. "Please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me." Elijah's eyes softened with understanding. "You have asked a difficult thing," he replied. "Yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be so for you. But if not, it shall not be so." The two prophets continued walking, their conversation flowing naturally despite the weight of imminent farewell. They spoke of simple things, memories of shared meals, of prayers offered together, of stars counted during night watches. These quiet moments held as much significance as any miracle they had witnessed. The gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers as they climbed a small rise. Birds called to one another in the trees nearby. The world seemed unusually vivid, colors more intense, sounds clearer, as if heaven had begun to overlay earth in that sacred space. Neither man knew exactly when the chariot would appear or how the transition would happen. This uncertainty kept them present in each moment, attentive to each other and to the divine presence that had guided their lives. Elijah paused occasionally to rest, not from physical weariness, but to savor these final moments of earthly existence. His face reflected peace rather than apprehension. Death, or transformation, held no fear for one who had walked so closely with God. As daylight began to fade, Elijah shared wisdom born from years of prophetic service. He spoke of faith during drought, courage before kings, and listening for the still, small voice. Each word was a gift, a final lesson from master to student. The sky above remained clear, stars beginning to appear one by one. Nature itself seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. Something extraordinary was about to happen on this ordinary patch of earth. Crossing the Jordan, a miraculous passage. The Jordan River flowed as it had for countless generations, its waters carrying silt from northern mountains to the Dead Sea. To most travelers, it represented a barrier to be crossed by boat or bridge. But for God's prophets, it became a testament to divine power. When Elijah and Elisha approached its banks earlier that day, they stood before rushing waters that showed no sign of yielding. 50 prophets watched from the hillside, wondering how the two would cross. Elijah removed his mantle, a simple garment that had become synonymous with his identity. With weathered hands that had once called fire from heaven, he rolled the cloak into a makeshift staff. Then, with quiet confidence, he struck the water's surface. The impact rippled outward, and then, miracle, the waters parted. Not gradually, not partially, but completely. A path of dry ground appeared between walls of suspended water. The river's flow halted in divine obedience to the prophet's faith. This moment echoed Israel's sacred history. Centuries before, Joshua had led the people across this same river on dry ground, carrying the Ark of the Covenant. Now Elijah and Elisha crossed over, linking past to present in God's unfolding story. As their feet touched dry riverbed, small pebbles crunched beneath their sandals. Fish darted in the water walls flanking their path. Sunlight filtered through the liquid barriers, casting shimmering patterns on the exposed ground. The 50 prophets, observing from the distance, fell silent in awe. They understood they were witnessing not merely a miracle, but a sign. The God who divided waters for Moses and Joshua now did the same for Elijah, confirming the continuity of divine purpose through generations. For Elisha, each step across the riverbed deepened his faith. This miracle wasn't meant to impress, but to instruct. The God who controlled waters could certainly orchestrate what would happen next. The transfer of prophetic office from master to disciple. When they reached the eastern shore, they turned briefly to watch the waters rush back together, resuming their eternal journey toward the Dead Sea. The river continued as before, yet everything had changed. Now, on the wilderness side of Jordan, they walked in solitude. This barren landscape had nurtured prophets before them. Moses had died in these hills after glimpsing the Promised Land. The terrain was harsh but holy. They followed no particular path, allowing divine guidance to direct their steps. Rocky outcroppings provided occasional shade from the afternoon sun. In the distance, mountains rose purple against the sky, sentinels watching over the unfolding sacred drama. Elisha remained attentive to his master's every word and gesture, understanding that these teachings would soon become memories to sustain him. Each conversation took on heightened significance, final instructions before Elijah's departure. The miracle at Jordan had confirmed God's presence, but it also posed questions. If the Lord could interrupt nature's course for a river crossing, what transformation awaited Elijah? The ancient patterns of life and death might yield to something entirely new. As the day progressed, Elisha noticed subtle changes in the quality of light around them. The air seemed charged with expectancy. Even common things, rocks, trees, clouds, appeared more vivid, as if seen through heaven's lens. Their conversation flowed naturally, despite the weight of what was coming. Elijah shared stories from his early days as a prophet, memories typically kept private. Now, with time growing short, he opened this treasury to his successor. "Remember," Elijah said quietly as they rested beneath a solitary tree, "power comes not in earthquake, wind, or fire, but in God's whispered presence." He paused, watching a hawk circle overhead. Learn to recognize that voice amid life's clamor. Elisha nodded, storing away these words like precious gems. Later, when facing his own trials, he would recall this wisdom spoken in the wilderness beyond Jordan. As they continued walking, the landscape began to change subtly. The air grew thinner, crisper, as if they climbed toward some invisible threshold. Neither man spoke of it, but both sensed the boundary between worlds was growing permeable around them. The chariot of fire, the heavenly departure. The afternoon light softened as Elijah and Elisha continued their final journey together. Neither knew exactly when or how the separation would occur, only that it was imminent. This uncertainty kept them fully present in each shared moment. Their conversation flowed naturally between practical matters and spiritual insights. Elijah offered final counsel about the prophetic communities Elisha would soon lead. His voice carried the gentle authority of one who had walked faithfully with God through decades of service. Without warning, the atmosphere around them changed. The air grew charged with energy, like the moments before a storm. Yet the sky remained clear, painted with the golden hues of approaching sunset. "Do you feel it?" Elijah asked softly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Elisha nodded, unable to find words for the holy dread and wonder filling his heart. The ground beneath their feet seemed to vibrate with subtle power. Birds fell silent in nearby trees. Even the wind held its breath. Then it appeared, a chariot of fire pulled by horses of flame, materializing not from earth, but from the very fabric of light itself. The vision defied natural categories. These were not earthly flames that consume and destroy, but living fire, pure energy shaped by divine will. The horses moved without touching ground, their manes flickering like torches in wind. The chariot gleamed with unearthly brilliance, too dazzling to study directly, yet impossible to ignore. Heat radiated from the apparition, not burning but purifying, like the warmth of deep healing. Between the two prophets, a whirlwind formed, a spiral of air and light connecting earth to heaven. It lifted Elijah gently, separating him from the ground he had walked for decades. His feet no longer touched soil. He existed between worlds. My father! My father!" Elisha cried out, "the chariots of Israel and its horsemen." These weren't words of despair, but recognition. In this singular, transcendent moment, Elisha understood what Elijah had truly been. Not merely one prophet, but Israel's spiritual defense, more powerful than armies. As the whirlwind carried Elijah upward, his mantle slipped from his shoulders, floating downward through shimmering air. The cloak, symbol of prophetic office and divine authority, descended like a leaf on autumn wind, landing softly at Elisha's feet. The transfer was complete. No ceremony, no formal words, simply a gift falling from heaven into waiting hands. Elisha bent to retrieve the mantle, his fingers trembling as they closed around the familiar fabric now entrusted to him. When he looked up again, the vision was fading. The chariot, the horses, the whirlwind, all ascending beyond mortal sight. For a moment, heaven's curtain had parted, allowing a glimpse of glory too bright for earthly eyes. Elisha stood alone on the plain, clutching the mantle. The air gradually cooled around him. Birds resumed their evening songs. The world settled back into ordinary rhythms, though nothing would ever be truly ordinary again after what he had witnessed. Elijah had not died as other men die. He had been translated, transformed, taken by God in a manner that transcended death's usual patterns. The prophet who had challenged kings, called down fire, and stood alone for truth had received a departure as remarkable as his life had been. As shadows lengthened across the landscape, Elisha turned back toward the Jordan River. The mantle in his hands represented not just responsibility, but confirmation. He had seen Elijah's departure, the condition for receiving the double portion he had requested. Night was approaching. Stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond their light, beyond the veil of visible creation, Elijah continued in God's presence. His earthly ministry had ended, but his spiritual influence had only begun to unfold. The cool evening breeze dried the tears on Elisha's face. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles against idolatry, new opportunities to demonstrate God's power. But tonight was for reflection, for honoring the transition from one prophetic era to another. He wrapped Elijah's mantle around his shoulders, feeling its weight settle upon him. Not just a garment, but a calling. Not just fabric, but faith made tangible. With each step back toward the Jordan, Elisha began to understand what it meant to carry forward a legacy received directly from heaven. Elisha's first miracles, proof of the double portion. The morning after Elijah's departure dawned clear and bright. Elisha stood at the edge of the Jordan River, the same waters his master had parted just yesterday. Now he faced them alone, Elijah's mantle draped across his shoulders, a tangible reminder of what had happened and what was now expected. 50 prophets watched from a distance, curious whether Elijah's power had truly transferred to his successor. They had witnessed the master's miracles for years. Would the student prove equal to the legacy he had inherited? Elisha removed the mantle from his shoulders, feeling its familiar weight in his hands. This simple garment had touched heaven's fire, had fallen from Elijah's shoulders as he ascended in the whirlwind. Now it represented the double portion of spirit Elisha had requested. "Where is the Lord, the God of Elijah?" he called out. Not questioning, but invoking, claiming the relationship that had empowered his mentor. Then, with movements that echoed Elijah's final miracle, he struck the water with the folded mantle. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The river flowed unchanged. In that suspended moment, doubt might have entered a lesser man's heart. But Elisha stood firm, trusting not in garments or gestures, but in the living God who had answered Elijah. Then the waters parted, dividing to the right and left. A path of dry ground appeared between flowing walls, identical to yesterday's miracle. The 50 watching prophets gasped collectively, then bowed in recognition. "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha," they declared. This first miracle served as divine confirmation. The passing of the mantle was no mere symbolism, but spiritual reality. Elisha had indeed received what he requested, the double portion of his master's spirit. After crossing the Jordan, Elisha journeyed to Jericho, where he encountered his next challenge. The city's elders approached with troubled expressions. "Our town is pleasant," they explained, "but the water is bad and causes death. A spring that should have brought life instead carried sickness." Elisha listened compassionately. His first healing would not be for a person, but for a community's water source, an element essential for all life. "Bring me a new bowl," he instructed, "and put salt in it." When they brought these simple items, Elisha walked to the spring's source. There he cast the salt into the waters, declaring, "Thus says the Lord, I have healed these waters." With these words, the spring was transformed, its waters made wholesome and life-giving. Unlike the dramatic fire on Mount Carmel, this miracle addressed basic human need. Clean water meant health for children, nourishment for gardens, life for livestock. Through this practical blessing, Elisha demonstrated that God cares about everyday suffering. The healed spring would continue flowing for generations, a lasting reminder of divine compassion. Every child who drank without falling ill, every field that flourished with its irrigation, all testified to God's ongoing presence through his prophet. From Jericho, Elisha traveled to Bethel, a center of calf worship under Jeroboam. As he approached the town, young men emerged, mocking both his appearance and his claim to Elijah's office. "Go up, baldhead," they jeered, referencing Elijah's ascension while insulting Elisha. These weren't innocent children, but young adults deliberately rejecting prophetic authority. Their contempt represented deeper spiritual rebellion in Bethel, where false worship had replaced true devotion. Elisha turned and looked at them, pronouncing judgment in God's name. From nearby woods, 2 bears emerged and mauled 42 of the mockers. This severe consequence demonstrated that rejecting God's messengers carried serious implications. Unlike his water-healing miracle, this event showed another facet of prophetic office, upholding divine honor against blatant disrespect. The prophet brought blessing to the respectful but couldn't prevent consequences for those who deliberately scorned God's authority. After these initial demonstrations of power, Elisha continued to Carmel, where Elijah had once called down fire from heaven. There he spent time in prayer and communion with God, seeking direction for his ministry ahead. His circle of influence began to widen as word spread about the new prophet. Some compared him to Elijah, noting similarities and differences. Where Elijah had been like fire, intense, consuming, often solitary, Elisha moved among people, healing and teaching with quieter strength. Yet both served the same God with unwavering faithfulness. Both confronted idolatry and called Israel back to covenant relationships. Both performed miracles that demonstrated divine power over nature and human affairs. As days passed, Elisha established relationships with the prophetic communities his master had led. He offered guidance, settled disputes, and continued the work of training future spiritual leaders. The double portion manifested not just in miracles, but in wisdom for leadership. News eventually reached King Jehoram about Elisha's emergence as Israel's foremost prophet. Royal attention would soon bring new challenges and opportunities. The king who had accommodated Baal worship must now reckon with another fearless voice for Yahweh. Elisha's path was taking shape, different from Elijah's, yet continuing the same essential mission. Each miracle confirmed that God remained active in Israel despite the nation's spiritual wandering. Each healing and judgment pointed toward the covenant relationship Israel had neglected. The mantle rested securely on new shoulders. The spirit that had empowered Elijah now worked through Elisha, sometimes in familiar ways, sometimes in surprising new expressions, but always with the same purpose, calling people back to the living God. The spirit of Elijah, legacy and echoes in later scripture. As seasons passed after Elijah's departure, his influence continued to ripple through Israel's spiritual landscape. Though physically absent, his spirit, his passion for truth, his unwavering stand against idolatry, his intimate connection with God lived on through Elisha and beyond. Elisha carried forward his master's work, performing twice as many recorded miracles as Elijah had. The double portion manifested in practical ways, healing lepers, multiplying food, raising the dead, advising kings. In each act, echoes of Elijah's ministry could be discerned. Stories of the great prophet spread throughout the region. Parents named children after him, hoping some measure of his courage might touch the next generation. Around evening fires, elders recounted his confrontation with the prophets of Baal, his flight to Mount Horeb, his final ascent in the chariot of fire. But Elijah's legacy extended far beyond folklore. The prophet Malachi, writing centuries later, delivered a profound message. "Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes." This promise planted Elijah firmly in Israel's future as well as its past. People began watching for signs of his return. Some believed he would appear in physical form, others that his spirit would manifest through another prophet. This expectation created a framework for recognizing God's decisive actions in history. During times of spiritual drought, faithful remnants found courage in remembering Elijah, one man who had remained true when an entire nation turned away. His solitary stand at Carmel became a template for fidelity amid widespread compromise. In Jewish tradition, a place was set for Elijah at Passover celebrations, an empty chair and cup awaiting the herald of redemption. This custom transformed memory into hope, linking past deliverance with future restoration. The centuries passed, Israel fell to Assyria, Judah to Babylon. Exiles returned and rebuilt the temple. Foreign powers claimed the promised land. Through these national tragedies and partial restorations, Elijah's memory remained a golden thread in Israel's tapestry. Then, during the Roman occupation, a strange figure appeared in the Judean wilderness. John the Baptist emerged from solitude wearing simple garments, speaking words of fire. His ministry beside the Jordan River struck many as familiar, a voice calling in the wilderness, uncompromising in its demand for repentance. When questioned about his identity, John denied being Elijah reincarnated. Yet Jesus later told his disciples, "If you are willing to accept it, he is Elijah who is to come." The spirit of Elijah had indeed returned through John, not physical reincarnation, but spiritual succession. John prepared the way for one greater than himself, just as Elijah had prepared Israel and appointed Elisha. Both prophets redirected attention from themselves toward God's unfolding purposes. Both lived as bridges between eras in salvation history. Jesus himself was sometimes mistaken for Elijah by crowds trying to categorize his ministry. This confusion revealed how deeply Elijah's archetypal prophet image had embedded itself in Jewish consciousness over the centuries. At Jesus' transfiguration on a mountain, Elijah appeared alongside Moses, conversing with the Messiah about his departure. The prophet, who had been taken to heaven without dying, stood with the lawgiver representing the foundation of Israel's covenant relationship with God. Their presence confirmed Jesus as fulfillment of both law and prophets. Elijah's appearance also reinforced his role as forerunner and witness to messianic identity. The circle that began at Carmel now completed itself on another mountaintop. Early Christians recognized connections between Elijah's ministry and Christ's. Both confronted corrupt religious and political systems. Both performed nature miracles demonstrating divine authority. Both experienced periods of rejection and withdrawal. Both were sustained by God in wilderness settings. As Christianity spread beyond Jewish communities, Elijah's story traveled with it. His miracles were understood as foreshadowing Christ's greater works. His victory over false prophets prefigured spiritual triumph over paganism. His ascension offered hope of bodily resurrection. In Eastern Orthodox tradition, Elijah became venerated as a saint, his icon showing him ascending in the fiery chariot. Monasteries dedicated to him appeared on mountains, continuing his legacy of solitary devotion amid dominant cultures of compromise. Centuries later, Elijah's spirit would inspire reform movements within Judaism and Christianity. When religious institutions grew corrupt or compromised, voices crying in the wilderness emerged, uncompromising, unbought, unafraid, each a new embodiment of Elijah's prophetic stance. The essence of Elijah transcended time and culture, not just a historical figure, but a spiritual archetype. Whenever truth faces overwhelming opposition, whenever faithful remnants stand against prevailing corruption, whenever heaven's fire must purge earth's altars, there Elijah's spirit manifests again. His legacy reminds us that one person standing firmly with God constitutes a majority. His story whispers courage to solitary believers in hostile environments. His life testifies that apparent defeat often precedes divine vindication. His departure promises that faithful service leads not to death but transformation. The mantle falls through generations, caught by hands ready to continue the work of restoration. The spirit of Elijah never truly departed. It merely awaits each new moment, when God's truth must challenge comfortable compromise, when divine fire must fall again on waiting altars. The prophecies of Malachi, the return of Elijah. As you settle in and prepare to drift towards sleep, let's explore how the story of Elijah continues long after his fiery chariot ride to heaven. In the gentle whispers of time, his name lived on through prophecy and promise. The last book of the Hebrew Bible, written by the prophet Malachi, speaks of Elijah in a way that bridges past and future. Malachi lived about 400 years after Elijah, yet the memory of the great prophet remained vivid in the hearts of the people. "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes," Malachi wrote. These words fell like soft rain upon a people longing for hope. The promise wasn't that Elijah himself would return in the flesh, but that his spirit, his zeal for truth and justice, would come again through another. This prophecy created a sense of waiting, of gentle expectation among the Jewish people. In homes and synagogues and quiet moments of prayer, they looked forward to seeing Elijah once more. They believed he would return as a harbinger of the Messiah, preparing the way like morning light before the sunrise. The words of Malachi brought comfort during dark times. When the temple was destroyed and the people scattered, they held close the belief that Elijah would come again to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents. a promise of healing for broken families and torn communities. Jewish sages pondered what this return might look like. Would he appear suddenly on a hillside? Would he walk through the marketplace, recognized by few? Or would his spirit simply fill another chosen vessel? The mystery added to the story's power, leaving room for wonder as generations came and went. Some teachers said Elijah would resolve all unsettled questions of religious law. Others believed he would restore lost treasures of the temple. Many thought he would simply bring peace to a troubled world. These varied hopes blended together like stars in the night sky, each adding its glow to the tapestry of faith. The waiting for Elijah became part of Jewish life and ritual. At Passover, a cup is filled and a door opened for the prophet who might enter any home, any night, bringing news of redemption. Children watch with heavy eyelids, hoping to glimpse the visitor from beyond. In the hills of Judea, stories were told of travelers who might be Elijah in disguise, a stranger who appears with wise counsel then vanishes, a poor man who turns out to be a blessing. The boundary between legend and hope grew thin, and Elijah lived on in the heart rather than history. Malachi's prophecy kept Elijah present among his people through centuries of change. Kings rose and fell, empires spread and crumbled, yet the gentle hope of the prophet's return remained constant, like a small flame that never quite goes out. And as the years passed, this flame would guide the way toward new chapters in the story, chapters where the spirit of Elijah would find fresh meaning in unexpected ways, touching lives beyond the borders of Israel, reaching into faiths not yet born when he first called down fire from heaven. Now, as your breathing deepens and your thoughts begin to drift, imagine that same patient waiting, that same gentle hope that sustained generations. Let the story carry you toward dreams, just as prophecy carried Elijah's memory through time. The Messianic connection. Elijah and John the Baptist. As stars shine more brightly when night deepens, so did the connection between Elijah and the coming Messiah grow clearer as time passed. This link found its fullest expression in the person of John the Baptist, a wild and wonderful figure who emerged from the Judean wilderness. Picture a man dressed in camel's hair, with a leather belt around his waist. His diet was simple, locusts and wild honey. His message was simple too: prepare the way for the Lord. If these images remind you of another prophet from the wilderness, they were meant to. John appeared during a time of yearning. Roman rule weighed heavily on Jewish shoulders, and many looked to ancient prophecies for comfort. They remembered Malachi's words about Elijah's return before the day of the Lord. They watched and waited with patient hearts. In the Gospel of Luke, an angel tells John's father about his son's future role. He will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah to turn the hearts of the parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. These words echo Malachi so closely that listeners would have caught the connection immediately. John wasn't claimed to be Elijah reborn, but rather one who carried his spirit, his courage, his calling to speak truth to power, his role as forerunner. John baptized in the Jordan River, not far from where Elijah had once parted the waters with his cloak. People came from all around to hear him speak. His voice carried across the water like thunder, sometimes harsh, always honest, calling for hearts to change before it was too late. When asked directly if he was Elijah, John said no. Yet Jesus later told his followers, "If you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come." This gentle paradox holds a deeper truth. John embodied the spirit of Elijah while remaining his own person. Like Elijah confronting Ahab, John stood before King Herod without fear. He spoke against the king's marriage to his brother's wife, placing principle above personal safety. This courage would eventually cost John his life, much as Elijah had once fled from royal wrath. Both prophets lived simply, rejecting comfort and luxury. Both appeared suddenly on the public stage with messages that disturbed the powerful. Both called people back to authentic faith rather than empty ritual. The parallels form a beautiful pattern across the centuries. John prepared the way for Jesus, just as Elijah was expected to prepare the way for the Messiah. When Jesus was transfigured on the mountain, Moses and Elijah appeared beside him, the law and the prophets bearing witness to something new unfolding. Some who watched Jesus' crucifixion thought they heard him calling for Elijah in his final moments. The connection between these figures had become so strong in popular imagination that even in death, they were linked together. Christians would come to understand John as fulfilling Malachi's prophecy about Elijah's return. This didn't diminish their respect for the original prophet. Rather, it expanded his story, showing how divine patterns repeat and echo throughout history. The relationship between Elijah, John, and Jesus reminds us that great stories don't end, they transform. Rivers flow into other rivers, stars become part of larger constellations, and as your mind drifts towards sleep, perhaps you'll see how your own story connects to ancient ones, patterns repeating like waves on the shore. Elijah in Jewish tradition, Passover and the empty chair. As twilight settles and day gives way to night, Jewish families around the world prepare their homes for Passover. Among the many beautiful traditions of this feast is one that keeps Elijah present in Jewish life, the custom of Elijah's cup. On the Seder table, amid the foods that tell the story of Exodus and freedom, sits an extra cup of wine. This cup remains untouched by human hands throughout the meal. It waits for an unseen guest, a visitor from beyond this world, the prophet Elijah. Later in the evening, often when children's eyes grow heavy with sleep, someone opens the door to welcome the prophet in. The moment blends hope and mystery. No one expects to see Elijah stride through the entrance, yet the ritual acknowledges that redemption can arrive when least expected. Some families watch the wine in Elijah's cup during this moment, looking for any ripple on its surface that might hint at an invisible visitor. Parents sometimes gently blow across the cup or tap the table to create the illusion of movement, keeping wonder alive in young hearts. This custom evolved from several streams of tradition. In earlier times, the fifth cup of wine at Passover remained a question. Should it be drunk or not? Rabbis decided to leave the matter for Elijah to resolve when he returns to answer all unresolved questions. What began as a scholarly debate became a beautiful symbol of hope. Beyond the Seder table, Elijah appears throughout Jewish folklore as a wanderer who brings help in unexpected ways. He arrives disguised as a poor traveler, a stranger seeking shelter. Those who show kindness to this visitor often discover later that they've entertained the prophet himself. These stories teach that holiness may come wrapped in ordinary packages. A beggar might be a prophet. A stranger might be a messenger from beyond. They encourage generosity and openness, qualities that Elijah himself embodied in his care for the widow of Zarephath. At Jewish circumcision ceremonies, a special chair is set aside for Elijah, guardian of the covenant. Parents place their 8-day-old sons briefly in this chair before the ritual begins. This custom recalls Elijah's zeal for the covenant when he confronted the prophets of Baal, affirming that each new Jewish child continues an ancient tradition. Elijah also appears in Havdalah ceremonies that mark the end of Sabbath. As weekly rest concludes and work begins again, Jews sing of Elijah the prophet, Elijah the Tishbite, hoping that he will come quickly in our days with the Messiah, son of David. The prophet bridges sacred time and ordinary days. In mystical traditions, Elijah became associated with hidden knowledge. Stories tell of him appearing to rabbis and scholars, revealing secrets of Torah that were previously unknown. He represents the divine breakthrough, wisdom that comes not through study alone, but through grace. During times of persecution, the figure of Elijah offered particular comfort. When Jewish communities faced violence and expulsion throughout medieval Europe, Elijah represented God's remembrance, a promise that they had not been forgotten, that justice would eventually come. The empty chair, the waiting cup, the door flung open to the night, these customs transform absence into presence. Though Elijah departed long ago, Jewish tradition keeps him eternally available, just beyond the threshold, ready to herald better days when suffering will end. As sleep draws nearer, perhaps you can picture that cup of wine catching the candlelight, the open door letting in a cool evening breeze. Sometimes absence creates its own kind of presence, and waiting becomes a sacred act all its own. Elijah in Christian tradition. Foreshadowing the Christ, Gentle Darkness enfolds us now as we explore how Christian tradition views Elijah. For followers of Jesus, this ancient prophet became a vital link in understanding their own faith story, a bridge connecting what came before with what was unfolding. On a high mountain, Jesus took 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John, away from the crowds. There, something remarkable happened. Jesus was transfigured before them, his face shining like the sun, his clothes becoming dazzling white, and appearing beside him were Moses and Elijah speaking with him. This moment, preserved in 3 of the 4 Gospels, places Elijah at the very center of Christian understanding. Moses represented the law, Elijah represented the prophets. Together they conversed with Jesus, suggesting continuity rather than rupture between traditions. The old was not abolished, but fulfilled. The disciples were awestruck. Peter, perhaps not knowing what to say, offered to build 3 shelters, one for Jesus, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Before he could act on this plan, a cloud enveloped them and a voice declared, "This is my son whom I love. Listen to him." When the cloud lifted, only Jesus remained. Early Christians found deep meaning in this story. Elijah's presence at the Transfiguration confirmed Jesus' role as the culmination of prophetic hope. The prophet who had not died but was taken up returned to bear witness to one whose death and resurrection would transform everything. Beyond the gospel accounts, Elijah's story offered Christians valuable patterns for understanding their own faith journey. His time alone in the wilderness paralleled Jesus' 40 days of testing. His raising of the widow's son foreshadowed greater resurrections to come. The still, small voice that spoke to Elijah on Mount Horeb reminded Christians that God often works through gentleness rather than display. This shaped how many understood spiritual experience, not always as dramatic as fire from heaven, but sometimes as quiet as a whisper in the soul. Monastic traditions found particular inspiration in Elijah. His solitude by the brook Cherith and on Mount Horeb offered a model for those seeking God in silence and simplicity. Some religious orders, particularly the Carmelites, claim special connection to the prophet through their origins on Mount Carmel. Icons and religious art frequently depict Elijah alongside other prophets and saints. In Eastern Orthodox churches, he often appears with dramatic flair, ascending in his fiery chariot or receiving food from ravens. These images kept his story fresh in the minds of believers who might never read the texts themselves. Medieval Christians sometimes blended Elijah with other mythic figures associated with fire and chariots, seeing connections with sun gods and celestial journeys. While these interpretations strayed from biblical accounts, they show how deeply Elijah captured the imagination. His waiting for God's voice taught patience. His confrontation with power taught courage. His depression under the broom tree taught honesty about human limits. Christians through the ages have found themselves in different parts of Elijah's story, drawing strength from his example. Some Christian traditions maintain a version of the Jewish expectation that Elijah will return before the final day of judgment. Particularly in Eastern churches, he is venerated as one who will come again to bear witness to truth in troubled times. As your consciousness gently drifts towards sleep, consider how stories travel across boundaries of time and tradition, taking new shapes while keeping their essential truth. Like water adapting to different vessels, Elijah's tale has nourished diverse communities while remaining recognizably itself. Elijah in Islamic tradition, a prophet's revered memory. As night deepens and stars wheel overhead, let's turn our attention to how Elijah, known as Ilyas in Arabic, lives on in Islamic tradition. Though mentioned less frequently than some other prophets in the Quran, he holds an honored place among those chosen to deliver divine messages. The Quran speaks of Elijah as among the righteous, listing him alongside other prophets known from biblical tradition. Peace be upon Ilyas, declares Surah 37, affirming his status as a messenger worthy of remembrance and respect. Islamic commentaries expand on these brief Quranic references. They tell how Elijah was sent to the people of Baalbek in the Lebanon region, where the worship of Baal had continued for generations. Like his biblical counterpart, the Ilyas of Islamic tradition stood firmly against idolatry. The story unfolds with familiar elements, a prophet calling people back to worship of the one true God, facing rejection and hostility, yet remaining steadfast in his mission. These themes resonate across all 3 Abrahamic faiths, creating threads of connection between diverse traditions. What distinguishes Islamic accounts is the emphasis on Elijah as a model of patience and perseverance. When most people rejected his message, he didn't abandon his responsibility. Instead, he continued teaching the few who would listen, fulfilling his duty regardless of results. Some Islamic traditions suggest that Elijah never died but remains alive, having drunk from the water of life. This parallels the biblical account of his ascension but adds an element of ongoing existence. Somewhere in this world, perhaps, Ilyas continues his journey. This belief connects to wider Islamic understandings about certain special figures who transcend ordinary human limitations. Along with Khidr, often associated with hidden wisdom, and sometimes Jesus, Elijah belongs to those who await the end of days in a state between earthly life and final judgment. Folk traditions throughout the Muslim world contain stories of encounters with Ilyas. Travelers speak of meeting a mysterious stranger who offers guidance then disappears. Fishermen in coastal regions sometimes invoke his name for protection, believing he has special authority over waters and weather. In Sufi mysticism, Elijah represents the perfect spiritual guide, one who has transcended material concerns and can lead others toward divine reality. His wilderness experiences symbolize the spiritual journey that requires separation from worldly attachments before deeper truths can be embraced. The shared reverence for Elijah across Judaism, Christianity, and Islam creates bridges of understanding between these traditions. His story reminds believers that prophetic truth transcends cultural boundaries, that God's messengers have spoken to many peoples in many times. Some medieval Muslim astronomers associated Elijah with celestial phenomena, particularly certain stars or constellations. His fiery ascension made him a natural symbol for cosmic forces, connecting earthbound religious narrative with the mysteries of the night sky stretching above us now. In regions where these faiths coexist, shared reverence for Elijah sometimes creates moments of unexpected harmony. Sacred sites associated with the prophet are visited by pilgrims of different backgrounds, each bringing their own understanding yet respecting the space they temporarily share. As sleep begins to claim your consciousness, consider how a single life, lived with purpose and recorded with care, can touch so many hearts across such vast stretches of time and space. From ancient Israel to tonight's quiet darkness, Elijah's story continues to speak, testify, and inspire. Let his journey accompany you now into dreams, where prophets and promises blend together in the gentle waters of rest. Peace be upon Ilyas, and peace be upon you as you drift towards sleep. Elijah in literature. From Dante to modern fiction. The story of Elijah has captivated writers across the ages. His bold confrontations, mysterious departure, and profound spiritual depth offer rich material for literary expression. In medieval times, Dante placed Elijah in his Divine Comedy, portraying him as one of heaven's inhabitants. The prophet appears in paradise, recognized for his fiery ascent and unwavering faith. Moving forward to the Renaissance, John Milton included references to Elijah in Paradise Lost. Milton drew parallels between angelic messengers and the prophet who communicated divine will. His portrayal emphasized Elijah's role as a voice in the wilderness, calling people back to truth amid spiritual confusion. By the 19th century, writers like George Eliot wove subtle allusions to Elijah into their novels. In works like Daniel Deronda, Eliot used prophetic figures to explore themes of spiritual awakening and moral courage. The prophet became a symbol for those who stand against corrupt systems, even at great personal cost. Victorian poets found inspiration in Elijah's dramatic life events. Christina Rossetti's religious poetry often touched on themes of divine provision and supernatural intervention, echoing Elijah's experiences by the brook Cherith. Robert Browning, known for his dramatic monologues, explored the psychology of biblical figures, including prophets who faced moments of despair like Elijah under the broom tree. Jewish writers particularly treasured Elijah's stories. Sholem Aleichem incorporated Elijah folklore into tales that brought comfort during difficult times. These stories portrayed Elijah as a wanderer who appears unexpectedly to help the righteous in moments of need. The prophet became a symbol of hope and divine presence in everyday struggles. In American literature, Herman Melville drew upon biblical imagery, including references to prophetic figures in Moby Dick. The character of Elijah, who warns Ishmael before his voyage, carries obvious connections to the biblical prophet. This mysterious figure foreshadows coming events, much as the original Elijah predicted future consequences. The 20th century saw more psychological explorations of biblical characters. Novels like The Prophet by Khalil Gibran, while not directly about Elijah, drew inspiration from prophetic traditions. Writers began examining the inner lives of those who bear divine messages, portraying the weight of such responsibilities. Contemporary fiction continues exploring Elijah themes through various lenses. Historical novels recreate 9th century Israel, imagining the political and religious tensions of Elijah's time. Fantasy writers incorporate elements of his story, the ravens, the fiery chariot, the still small voice, into new mythic landscapes. Children's literature embraces Elijah with particular warmth. Picture books depict the feeding by ravens or the contest on Mount Carmel with vivid illustrations. These adaptations emphasize courage, faith, and divine care, making ancient stories accessible to young readers through simplified language and engaging narratives. Through all these literary expressions, Elijah's story continues speaking to human hearts. Writers return to his journey because it touches universal experiences. Standing alone for truth, facing despair, finding unexpected provision, and ultimately being carried beyond earthly limitations. The prophet's literary presence offers a quiet reminder that our stories connect to something larger than ourselves, a thought that brings comfort as sleep draws near. Elijah in art, from icons to modern interpretations. The visual portrayal of Elijah spans centuries of artistic expression. Byzantine icon painters first established his recognizable image, bearded, often clad in animal skins, with intense eyes reflecting inner fire. These early depictions emphasized his prophetic authority, showing him receiving divine messages or confronting worldly powers with calm assurance. Medieval illuminated manuscripts contain small but detailed scenes from Elijah's life. Gold leaf highlights moments of divine intervention: fire consuming the sacrifice, ravens bringing bread, the chariot of flame. These images appeared alongside biblical text, helping illiterate worshippers connect with sacred stories through visual means. Renaissance masters brought new dimensions to Elijah artwork. Daniela de Volterra's powerful fresco Elijah in the Chariot of Fire captures the prophet's dynamic ascension with swirling clouds and dramatic lighting emphasizing the supernatural nature of the event. During this period, artists began showing more human emotions in Elijah's face: determination on Mount Carmel, fear while fleeing Jezebel, peaceful surrender during his heavenly departure. The Baroque period embraced Elijah's dramatic moments. Rubens painted the prophet Elijah receiving bread and water from an angel, depicting the exhausted prophet with sympathetic realism while maintaining divine grandeur through the angel's presence. These works emphasized contrast between light and shadow, despair and hope, human limitation and divine possibility. Dutch artists like Ferdinand Bol created intimate scenes of Elijah with the widow of Zarephath, focusing on human interaction rather than supernatural elements. These quiet domestic settings revealed the prophet's compassion, showing tender moments as he returned the widow's son to life or shared a simple meal in her home. Jewish art traditions developed unique approaches to Elijah imagery. Since Jewish law cautioned against representing biblical figures directly, artists often portrayed Elijah's presence symbolically: an empty chair at Passover, a cup of wine, or subtle references within larger scenes. These visual cues reminded viewers of the prophet's spiritual presence without attempting to capture his physical form. By the 19th century, pre-Raphaelite painters like Lord Frederick Leighton created richly detailed biblical scenes, including Elijah in the wilderness. These works combined historical research with romantic sensibility, placing the prophet in meticulously rendered Middle Eastern landscapes while conveying emotional and spiritual depth. Modern artists have taken increasingly abstract approaches. Marc Chagall incorporated Elijah imagery in his dreamlike biblical scenes, using floating figures and vibrant colors to suggest spiritual reality beyond physical appearance. Contemporary Jewish artists like Samuel Bach sometimes include subtle Elijah references in complex paintings, addressing themes of hope amid suffering. Religious communities worldwide maintain traditions of Elijah representation. Ethiopian Christian art shows him in distinctly African settings, while Russian Orthodox icons continue Byzantine traditions with local adaptations. These diverse cultural expressions demonstrate the prophet's universal appeal across geographical boundaries. Digital artists now create Elijah images for books, films, and games. These contemporary interpretations often blend historical research with imaginative elements, making ancient stories visually accessible to new generations. Whether realistic or stylized, these modern portrayals continue the long tradition of using visual arts to help us see beyond the visible world, much as Elijah himself looked beyond immediate circumstances to perceive divine reality. Elijah in music, hymns, oratorios, and folk songs. Music has given voice to Elijah's story through diverse forms across centuries. Perhaps most famous is Felix Mendelssohn's oratorio Elijah, completed in 1846. This magnificent work brings the prophet's life to musical form through stirring choruses, contemplative arias, and dramatic recitatives. Mendelssohn captured pivotal moments: the drought declaration, the Mount Carmel confrontation, the still small voice, with emotional depth that continues moving audiences today. Medieval plain chant included selections for feast days associated with the prophet. These simple, flowing melodies created space for reflection on Elijah's spiritual significance. Monks in quiet monasteries sang these chants, their voices rising and falling like the gentle rhythm of breath during rest, connecting ancient stories to present worship. Folk traditions across Jewish communities preserved Elijah melodies that were passed down through generations. During Passover celebrations, songs welcome the prophet's symbolic visit with cheerful, hopeful tunes. These melodies often feature minor keys that reflect both suffering and deliverance, themes central to Elijah's story and Jewish experience. Christian hymn writers found inspiration in the prophet's journey. The 19th century produced hymns like Immortal, Invisible, God Only Wise, with textual references to divine revelation similar to Elijah's experience on Mount Horeb. Others drew lessons from specific episodes: God's provision, courage in opposition, hope in despair, setting these themes to singable melodies for congregational worship. African American spirituals sometimes incorporated Elijah imagery, particularly his fiery ascension. The spiritual Swing Low, Sweet Chariot likely references this moment. These songs used biblical stories as coded language for hope of deliverance, finding in Elijah a powerful symbol of God's intervention on behalf of the oppressed. Modern composers continue exploring Elijah themes. Michael Card's contemporary Christian song, The Voice of the Lord, reflects on the still small voice experience. Arvo Pärt's minimalist approach creates contemplative spaces reminiscent of Elijah's desert solitude through repetitive patterns and carefully placed silence. Jewish cantorial music includes liturgical pieces referencing Elijah's expected return. These melodies combine ancient modal patterns with emotional expressiveness, singers using vocal ornamentation to convey yearning for redemption. During circumcision ceremonies, gentle songs welcome Elijah as witness, creating a musical link between past, present, and future generations. Film composers have written scores for biblical epics that include Elijah scenes. These soundtracks use orchestral color to heighten dramatic moments: brass for Mount Carmel's triumph, gentle strings for ravens bringing food, thunderous percussion for the chariot of fire. Even when not directly depicting Elijah, wilderness scenes in film music often echo themes associated with prophetic isolation and revelation. Children's music simplifies Elijah's stories through catchy melodies and repetitive choruses. These songs emphasize memorable elements: fire from heaven, ravens with bread, the whirlwind, helping young listeners absorb biblical narratives through music's mnemonic power. The musical settings create positive associations with these ancient stories. From grand oratorios to simple lullabies, music continues carrying Elijah's story to listeners of all ages. These musical expressions reach emotional depths that words alone might miss, helping us feel the prophet's courage, despair, wonder, and peace. As we listen, we're invited into a timeless rhythm that connects our breathing to the breath of stories that have sustained faith through countless generations. Elijah in film and media, cinematic portrayals. The dramatic life of Elijah provides rich material for visual storytelling in film and television. Early biblical epics approached his story with reverence and spectacle. The 1953 film Queen Jezebel featured Elijah as a commanding figure confronting royal corruption. These classic productions emphasized grand moments like the Mount Carmel contest, with impressive, if sometimes dated, special effects showing fire consuming the water-drenched altar. Television brought Elijah to weekly viewing with series like The Bible, 2013, where actor Diogo Morgado portrayed the prophet with intensity and emotional range. The visual medium allowed directors to contrast Elijah's wilderness isolation with palatial scenes of Ahab and Jezebel, using landscape and architecture to highlight spiritual conflicts. Desert filming locations created authentic backdrops for Elijah's journeys, the harsh terrain underscoring his physical and spiritual tests. Animated adaptations made Elijah accessible to children. Series like Superbook and Veggie Tales translated complex narratives into colorful, though simplified versions that maintained core themes while using humor and contemporary references to engage young viewers. These programs often emphasize divine provision and courage, showing Elijah's human moments of doubt alongside his faithful actions. Documentary filmmakers have explored Elijah from historical and archaeological perspectives. Programs examining ancient Israel often include segments on 9th century prophets, using expert interviews, archaeological findings, and location footage to place Elijah in historical context. These documentaries help viewers understand the political and religious tensions that shaped his ministry. Independent films have offered more nuanced, character-driven portrayals. Rather than focusing solely on miraculous elements, these productions explore Elijah's psychological journey, his fear, loneliness, and moments of doubt. By showing the prophet's humanity, these intimate narratives create relatable entry points into ancient stories. Digital media has expanded Elijah's presence through interactive platforms. Bible apps include audio dramatizations with voice actors and sound effects, bringing his confrontations and quiet moments to life. Online videos use animation and contemporary settings to help new audiences connect with prophetic themes of speaking truth to power and finding divine presence in unexpected places. Video games occasionally include Elijah-inspired characters or scenarios that echo his story, testing players with challenges requiring courage against overwhelming odds or quests involving wilderness survival. Though rarely direct adaptations, these interactive narratives draw on prophetic archetypes that resonate across cultural boundaries. Social media has generated new forms of Elijah content through short videos, memes, and artistic interpretations shared across platforms. These brief, often creative expressions distill elements of his story into formats suited for quick consumption while potentially inspiring deeper exploration. A single powerful image of Elijah facing the prophets of Baal might spark curiosity about the complete narrative. Middle Eastern filmmakers have brought cultural authenticity to Elijah portrayals. Productions from regions familiar with desert life and ancient Near Eastern religious contexts offer insights sometimes missing from Western interpretations. These films often show greater awareness of the social dynamics and daily realities that form the backdrop to Elijah's ministry. Virtual reality experiences now allow users to walk on Mount Carmel or stand in Naboth's vineyard. These immersive technologies create sensory connections to biblical landscapes, helping viewers feel physically present in the story. As we look toward future media developments, Elijah's timeless narrative continues finding expression through each new technological canvas, speaking across centuries with remarkable resilience. The Eternal Elijah, a timeless story. Elijah's story flows like an underground river through human history, sometimes hidden but always nourishing our collective imagination. What makes this ancient prophet endure in our consciousness when so many figures fade? Perhaps it's the universal elements woven through his particular journey. Standing alone for truth, facing dark nights of the soul, discovering unexpected help, and ultimately transcending mortal limits. His narrative speaks to our deepest struggles. When we feel overwhelmed by cultural pressures, Elijah reminds us that one voice can matter. His confrontation with hundreds of Baal's prophets resonates whenever truth faces powerful opposition. We recognize our own moments of courage, speaking up in meetings, defending values against popular trends, choosing integrity over convenience, as echoes of his Mount Carmel stand. The prophet's cave experience addresses our need for quiet amid noise. When Elijah heard the still small voice, he discovered divine presence, not in earthquake, wind, or fire, but in gentle whispers. This reminds us to create space for listening in our notification-filled lives. His story validates both active engagement and contemplative withdrawal as necessary rhythms in a balanced spiritual life. Elijah speaks to our darkest moments too. His despair under the broom tree, wanting life to end, acknowledges depression's reality without stigma. The angels who provided food and rest rather than immediate solutions offer wisdom about healing through basic needs and gentle care. When feeling broken, this ancient story reminds us that recovery often begins with simple steps: eat, sleep, walk, then listen. The prophet crosses boundaries that often divide us. While firmly rooted in Jewish tradition, Elijah holds significance for Christians and Muslims as well. In a world quick to emphasize differences, his story creates common ground for interfaith conversation. The shared reverence for Elijah reminds us that spiritual wisdom transcends any single tradition. Children intuitively grasp elements adults sometimes miss in Elijah's story. They notice the ravens bringing food, nature itself participating in care. They appreciate the simplicity of the flour jar that never emptied, daily provision, rather than spectacular wealth. Through children's eyes, we rediscover wonder in ordinary sustenance and help from unexpected sources. Elijah's departure in the whirlwind speaks to our longing for meaningful endings. Unlike most biblical figures whose deaths are simply recorded, Elijah's story offers a transcendent conclusion. This mysterious transition resonates with our hope that life's final chapter might be not an ending but a transformation. His story whispers that our journeys continue beyond what eyes can see. The empty chair at Passover Seder's beautifully captures Elijah's enduring promise. It stands for hope not yet fulfilled, for justice still coming, for guests not yet arrived. This physical symbol embodies faithful waiting, not passive resignation, but active anticipation. The cup poured but not yet drunk reminds us that history remains unfinished, with better chapters still to be written. What makes Elijah truly timeless is his story's perfect balance of strength and vulnerability. He demonstrates that courage doesn't require feeling fearless and that conviction can coexist with doubt. This integration of seemingly opposite qualities creates a fully human portrait that each generation recognizes anew. He feels simultaneously like someone from an ancient scroll and someone we might meet tomorrow. As we conclude this journey through Elijah's legacy, perhaps we're left with the prophet's most enduring gift, the reminder that we're part of something larger than ourselves. His story connects us to thousands of years of human searching, struggling, failing, and transcending. Like a lullaby carrying us towards sleep, Elijah's narrative assures us we're held in an ancient, ongoing story that continues long after our eyes close. In this gentle knowledge, we can rest.